You know, some days in the summer, get an opportunity to take a day off. Feels like every day is a day off because of the level of fun that we have on the regular here at Query & Company. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison, captain of the ship.
Howdy.
Behind the ones and twos, CEO
Good afternoon.
of the company. And, of course,
hope you're doing well.
One of our favorites. You know him over at The Athletic. If you're not subscribing, you should be. I'm not saying this just because he's here, even though Eddie will accuse me of it because it's very on brand for our relationship. But the man to my right is one of the reasons that I have an athletic
accuse you of
subscription.
what?
What do you think I'm doing there? What would you ordinarily accuse me of?
He's schmoozing.
There it is. Thank you. Yeah, one of the reasons that I have a subscription to The Athletic. There's many reasons. I love the content there. They have a lot of good stuff year round. There's a gentleman who we've had on the program in the past who's out in Kansas City, Nate Taylor. He does a great job covering the Chiefs side of things. Has Pacers ties because he was on the Star beat for a while. What'd you say? Former Indy guy, exactly. So there's ties there, but this isn't a former Indy guy. This is an Indy guy. I guess you could say former Illinois guy. He is James Boyd. Follow him on Twitter at Romeoville Kid. James, how are you?
I'm doing good. Obviously excited to be in with you all. Feels like old times from last summer. So I've had a good summer so far. Enjoying the time off before Colts camp gets back in action, and obviously soaking everything in, whether it's Colts, Fever, Pacers, you name it.
How different has this year been for you? Because for those of you that don't know, again, you can follow him on Twitter at Romeoville Kid. But James' primary hat is beat writer covering the Indianapolis Colts for The Athletic. But The Athletic doesn't have as many as they did maybe 4 or 5 years ago, dedicated beat writers to every sector of the cities they cover. Sometimes it's more been broad strokes the last couple of years, and that relies on people with the craft to go cover multiple sports, as James has covered a variety of different capacities, both professional sports in this town, the Pacers and the Colts. But with so much going on this summer with the Fever, who are just about to tip off against the Washington Mystics today, we will give you updates on that throughout as the Fever look to continue their winning ways with just a couple games left before the Olympic break. But with so much going on, and this being, what, year 4 for you on the Colts beat or year 3?
Year 3 going into for the Colts.
How different is this offseason given not just Colts focus, but with so much going on in the city that maybe a year ago might not have been on your radar or your assignments to cover?
Yeah, it's been a great, crazy year overall. I mean, I pretty much covered everything major in the city besides the Olympic trials because I know nothing about swimming and I don't want to embarrass myself on the beat. But it's been good because I like to be around the energy. So when the Pacers made it to the East Conference Finals, it was cool to see some familiar faces and go back around and cover those playoff games. And my first playoff game, actually, professionally. And then also, you know, obviously, Cold Spring Ball is always exciting because it's the first time you've seen the guys since the season ended. And now we have Caitlin Clark here, who I just tweeted it when I was coming over. Man, her jersey is like prime Peyton Manning right now as far as popularity. It is everywhere on every kid, every grandma, every grandpa, every man, every woman. It doesn't matter.
Could be
see her jersey,
could be jersey, could be actual jersey.
I just see her merchandise
Yep.
everywhere. And I just think to myself, you know, how much cotton do you need to get through all these things? Because she is that famous and that popular. And obviously every game, I believe so far for the Fever has been sold out, which is unprecedented for their franchise, really for the WNBA, to have someone kind of, you know, just with that amount of star power. So I've enjoyed it a lot. I've been forcing myself really to take some time off. I'm on vacation right now, so I haven't been around as much. Got to see the family, you know, hang out. And I take that, you know, with a lot of pride because I don't see them that much during the season. And you have to give yourself an off season as much as I want to be around for everything. So foot off the gas for now, but I'm looking forward to, you know, potentially, you know, covering a Fever playoff game if they make it that far.
Last one to put you on the spot, because for those that are well connected with James on different avenues of social media, you mentioned going back to your parents' house, and I'll put you on the spot slightly because we've all done it at some point. When you return home and there's a moment where, no, listen, guys, you were going to make dinner. It's fine. No, I've got this. I'm going to wear the cape today. I'm going to take care of dinner. It was a pasta dish of some kind.
Yeah.
Is the first time cooking for your family? And if so, what were the reviews like for the James Boyd pasta dish?
So it wasn't the first time. I've made a couple of different dishes at this point for them. You know, first few times was with the air fryer, so I feel like you're cheating. This time I used like the actual stove, and It was steak pasta with bell peppers and onions.
Looked delicious.
A bunch of different seasonings and stuff like that. And I literally just Googled it that day, and I was like, let's just go for it. I mean, that's what I do at home with myself. So
what was the who did you say gave the quote about if you can read, you can cook?
My grandma.
Yeah. Stuff.
So
that's
when I moved out from my parents'
line.
house 3 years ago, I had really never cooked before besides like grilled cheese and stuff.
Sure.
And you figure out, eating out costs a lot, and you find out how to cook very quickly when you want to save money. And so I've been trying a couple different things. And I usually try it myself first. That way, if I know I got to tweak something, I don't like ruin it for everybody else. But I didn't have too many, too much opposition from the family.
Sure.
My dad was hating a little bit until he got his first scoop, and then he, was quiet. And that's when I got some respect around there. I let him know, I'm a grown man these days. So my mom was very proud, though. All jokes aside, it was really cool to share recipes with her and stuff like that. She kind of, appreciates that I was able to survive. She worries if I eat enough vegetables sometimes, and I got it done. So it was fun. It was a good experience.
That is the job of moms, to be certain, and it's always cool to be able to show, hey, no, listen, I can take care of myself. I can take care of you guys in this situation. Speaking of taking care of oneself, or maybe taking care of one's entire operation, that is the goal for the Indianapolis Colts in a lot of ways going into training camp here in a couple of weeks. The most notable of taking care of oneself is the health and the status of Anthony Richardson. And we're going to cover a lot of ground today. We're going to go big picture on acquisitions that the Pacers have made. We are going to look across the NBA landscape with Team USA's first showcase game taking place later today around 10 o'clock or so out in Las Vegas as they take on Canada and get ready for their trip to Paris here in a couple of weeks. Of course, Tyrese Halliburton, a part of that roster. We'll cover a lot of ground there, and then we'll tease this one as vague as possible. But there's something happening next week that I've been excited about for the better part of 10 years. And that might give it away a little bit too much, but it also ties into something we're very excited about going forward once the fall arrives. So we're excited about that aspect of things as well. But starting with the Colts. Yes, Anthony Richardson is top priority, but there's a lot of avenues on this roster that we've spent just talking about where are the biggest holes on this team? Where are the biggest areas where they need improvement? And there's obvious ones. We've talked about the cornerback room. There are areas of strengths there with Juju Brents and Kenny Moore. There's also a lot of areas of concern and potential weakness with where the secondary is a year later, being a year older, and them getting torched ad nauseum at times against wide receiver options galore from the opposition last season. Whether or not that'll improve, we will observe as the season unfolds. But the pieces that are actually intact, and Eddie had brought this up in our pre-show planning, and I think it's a fascinating discussion because you want to see where the real strengths on this team are. If we were to go around and look at the Colts roster and look at, say, 4 to 5 players that are untouchable, not in terms of trade value, but untouchable in terms of irreplaceable is the better word. 5 irreplaceable guys that if you were to lose them in any capacity would really put this team behind the 8 ball in a lot of ways. We'll leave this open to the trio of us. I'd like to get Eddie's thoughts on this as well, but off the bat, James, the top of that list, I think unanimously for us, and maybe somebody will go off the board here. We often do, but Anthony Richardson's the clear number one.
Yeah, I would say.
And he says no. Okay, let's go first with the to me it's indefinite because at that position, even if Flacco gets you 5 good starts, you're not going to be the team you want to be this year, certainly, and you're not going to learn still about key areas of this roster, like the pairing with Jonathan Taylor, like is Alec Pierce actually good because he has a quarterback that can launch the ball downfield? There's serious question marks on this roster that can only be answered with a healthy Anthony Richardson. He would be number one for me. For you, James, is he at the top of you cannot lose this guy, you're screwed otherwise?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we all appreciate Anthony Richardson's personality, his approach. Like I said before, he is one of the more layered individuals I've covered, even at his age. I believe he's 22 now. And he's been very transparent about, hey, I got to stay healthy. Hey, I got to prove myself. Hey, I want to be great. And I think right now he's still in the honeymoon stage of his, and feel free to chime in, Eddie. He's peeking his head up. I think he's in the honeymoon stage of his career right now,
Well,
where he's very loved.
He's peeking his head up because he got the chai tea going today.
Oh, I didn't see.
It's the
But the
matcha.
matcha tea is
Matcha.
the green matcha tea. That's my
So you got to get
apologies.
your
Sorry,
facts
that's
straight.
on me. It's on me.
But
But you mentioned that not like honeymoon is in good vibes, but this is a de facto rookie campaign again.
I think it's a little bit of both because the city loves him right now. I'm not saying they're going to turn on him, but I do think that they have not been very critical of him because there hasn't been much to be critical of. He hasn't played.
Right.
And I think all of us, at least the mature people can say, hey, 1 year, one unlucky hit, we won't label you as injury prone. However, we all know things change quickly when you don't stay on the field. And so I think that this year is a big year to sort of quiet whatever doubts or noise might be around you, whether it's health, whether it's play, those types of things, because I don't think the honeymoon stage is going to last past this season if he can't stay out there.
Eddie, you pushed back very quickly
Yes, sir.
when I went off with the top of my list and went as far to say the unquestioned number one would have to be Anthony Richardson because of his importance. Your rebuttal to that of why you don't think he's number one, I assume he's on the list.
Nope.
Not on the list at all. Okay,
No.
Then the floor is yours. Why is he not number one? Why, let alone, is he not on the list? And who is your number one of this guy's gone, tear it down, season's over?
When I think of, in terms of players being irreplaceable, if that player's not out there, then it severely impacts or majorly impacts the likelihood of you winning that game. And when I look at last season, Richardson goes down and they still win 9 games with Gardner Minshew. Joe Flacco looked good last year with Cleveland, and the offense I don't think would deviate too much from Richardson to Flacco like it did from Richardson to Minshew. I think there's still going to be aspects of being able to push the ball down the field vertically. I think the passing game will be much better with Joe Flacco in comparison to Gardner Minshew. That's why for number one for me in terms of Colts that are the most irreplaceable, or what was the word you used? I can't remember.
Yeah, irreplaceable.
Okay, yeah. I said Michael Pittman Jr. because you have
That's a good one.
you
That's
have
a great one,
you
actually.
have an unproven Adonai Mitchell, and you go back to that Atlanta Falcons game last season. The Falcons defense is not an elite group, but they weren't terrible. They're average, and the Colts made them look like the best. Let them look like the best defense in the NFL that one game without Michael Pittman Jr. So that's to me why he's the most indispensable. I think that was the word you used. He's the most.
I used a couple
indispensable
words in
yeah.
your defense. So,
He's number one.
Sure.
You know
for me.
what? To piggyback off that, Eddie, so the last game he missed before that one, I believe, was week 2 in Jacksonville in 2022 when they didn't score. And it was with Matt Ryan.
Yeah.
So when he doesn't play, he doesn't miss very many games. But if he ever misses a game, their offense looks so bad when he's not in there. And that to me, I mean, obviously he doesn't want to get hurt. But on a tangent, I was watching some of those games. I was like, this is going to get paid this summer.
Yeah.
Because we saw what it was without him. They had to pay him.
He's on my list. He's number 2 for the reasons
Okay.
that Eddie outlined, because
Solid.
the offense, I think, you can't argue that. Regardless who the quarterback is, the offense takes a step back when you lose your number one wide receiver, especially when the amount of fallback options that you have on this team is limited to that wide receiver room. I've talked about it. Look, there's hardworking NFL players in that tight end room. I don't mean any disrespect to the craft that is there, but no one, if you gave True Serum in that building, is going to tell you they have I won't even use bona fide, I will say above average tight end. That is not currently, with any evidence, we can talk in hyperbole if we want, with any evidence of stats, of advanced metrics, of snap count, whatever you want to label it, of health status, that's not available in that tight end room. And that is a big unlocking piece, I think, to Shane Steichen's offense. Maybe Jelani Woods has a great year this year, stays healthy, and reaches that heights. But right now, you can't definitively say that. We know the question marks about Alec Pierce. A.D. Mitchell's a rookie. How fair is it, or where is the level of fairness to judge him before he plays a snap of what he could be?
Right, I think that's fair.
In the NFL.
Right.
And then you have Josh Downs, who was solid last year. You move Michael Pittman Jr. from that wide receiver room, it's chaos. The one thing I will push back on with Joe Flacco, and I will concede that the reason you go and sign Flacco at this stage isn't just a financial move. It is, there's no ego there with Flacco anymore. He's been a starting quarterback. That's no longer not to say there was that with Minshew, but there's no longer a clear, I deserve to be a starter mentality for Joe Flacco. He knows what his career is at this point. That's not what the NFL is asking of him. Not to say if Richardson went down, he would shrivel up at the opportunity. We saw him shine at times last year. I go best if benched by, like an expiration date on a milk carton. Jake goes donut tire, both equally good analogies. But we know where the bench by date is. We know where the donut tire will fail date is with Joe Flacco. We saw it last year. Additionally, I would rather not have the season yet again hinge on a 39-year-old, soon to be 40, still being able to somehow cook up some witchcraft to look like he's 27. Like, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think if Anthony Richardson goes down, they go from a projected 9-win team, they're 8.5 in Vegas, to a 5-win team.
Really?
I think it's a 4-loss loss without him.
Whoo. Go
you
ahead,
don't
Eddie.
have that much confidence in Shane Steichen to be able to coach up the offense week in, week out to scheme up wins?
It's not a matter of doubting his scheme. It is compounding the absence of your franchise quarterback with the other concerns I have on this team.
I mean, he won
like
with
the
Gardner
secondary.
Minshew and no Jonathan Taylor.
I know he did. I think at this stage of the quarterback's career, if you had Minshew back there another year versus 39-year-old Joe Flacco, I'd rather have Minshew.
Wow.
Like that.
Oh,
that's
that's
where
a
I'm at.
take. That's a take. And
Wow.
I actually don't hate this because I would say I disagree. I would probably lean. I don't know, because I've you know what? I might be on Jimmy's side because I know that Gardner's a proven commodity. I don't know what Joe Flacco will look like with Shane Steichen in his system.
Flacco. Here's the thing.
No, I saw your eyes get really big, Eddie.
Flacco impressed the heck out of me last year. I did not think he still had that in him. Like, and it went for longer than I thought it would. But Minshew, he's had the same thing that all backup quarterbacks have, Minshew specifically. You know the end date. You know at some point he's going to fall off. But with Minshew where he's at in his career, you still feel guaranteed that you're going to get 3, 4, 5 quality starts from him before it dips because of his age, because of the mileage there. I don't want to bank on the 39-year-old. I don't want to do it.
But, I mean, you're like handcuffed with him at quarterback.
That's true too.
Like
With-
in terms of
what you can do,
explosiveness.
yeah.
With Minshew?
Yes.
Down the field.
That you mean, so you're saying that the perceived arm strength, which, to be clear, you saw it at times. It wasn't like,
Oh, it's there.
let me finish. This isn't Josh Allen. He can do it, sure, more than Minshew, but the idea of him being able to do it again over a 7-game, 5-game stretch, whatever, at age 39, I just don't want to bet on that. Like, I apologize if that's viewed as an ignorant take,
No,
but
I think
I don't
that's
want to bet
fair.
on
I think I see where both sides are coming from. And this is why, Anthony Richardson, if you're listening, stay healthy.
Yeah,
so we don't have
right.
to argue about this. But to
Also,
your
it's not like I'm calling for Sam Ehlinger.
No,
like
no.
Minshew is a proven commodity for what he is.
Yeah, and Joe Flacco is too, obviously,
Sure,
former Super
correct,
Bowl
yes.
champ. But the thing about older quarterbacks, and I'm curious to hear Eddie's thoughts on this, I feel like the cliff comes so soon sometimes. They'll
Yep.
be good one year,
Happens in a
and then like
blink of
the
an eye.
next year it's like it's lost. I mean, we saw it with Matt Ryan, and so I'm just like, like you have 1 year where you show you can do it. I'm not saying that Joe Flacco can't, but it's like, how long can you keep doing it? I think we take for granted because we see obviously the Aaron Rodgers and the Tom Brady's and Peyton Manning, even to a certain extent, and it's like, how long can you stay at a starter caliber level in the NFL? So
Let me, and if I'm moving the goalpost here, Eddie, you can tell me I am. That's fine.
Very good.
Because I don't want to do that. And I know that I'm prefacing it, if I'm prefacing that I am, then I definitely am. For the sake of this exercise, and if there's Colts fans that are clutching their steering wheels or your iPhone or whatever you're listening to us on today, and thank you for doing that. Shout out to the break room as well over on youtube.com,
Twitter/X and
Twitter,
Facebook.
X, Facebook, wherever you're watching. Happy Wednesday to you. Let's say, for the sake of argument, this irreplaceable aspect for these players, they're missing week 1 and beyond. This is done for the season. You don't get them at all this year. The reason I bring that up, and maybe I'm moving the goalpost slightly, so if I am, feel free to push back. Flacco's last 6 years that's been asked of him, and this isn't an injury chart, so again, correct me if like there were injuries here that he missed that I'm goofing on. 9 games, 8 games, 5 games, 2 games, 5 games, 5 games. 5 games last year against Cleveland. I'm good with 4 or 5 games. If this was to happen in camp, which isn't out of the realm of possibility, that's why I view Anthony Richardson as the important piece that he is, why he's my number 1 on this list. And I'm very happy for this discussion, and I tip the cap as well to Eddie, because we're still only at 1 and 2 right now, and we're probably going to have to spread this conversation over a couple segments, which is good. The reason that I fight for Anthony Richardson at number 1 as the most irreplaceable piece is because from Flacco's body of work in his career the last 6 years, you're not asking for a full season's workload. You're asking for a mini stretch. What was it? What did it end up for Minshew last year? 13 games?
Yeah, I believe it was 13 games.
Give or take?
Yeah, somewhere in that range.
Like, you're talking about a near full season's workload, and they were a game away. I would rather that not rest on the shoulders of the 39-year-old quarterback who, granted, had a insane one comeback player of the year, right? Like,
yeah,
he was incredible last season. But you're right, James.
But he also was out of the NFL for a reason too.
Right.
So,
and it was viewed as a panic Hail Mary move that paid off for the Browns. It did. It worked for them undoubtedly. They wind up losing to Houston last year in the playoffs. Like they made the postseason because of Joe Flacco. That will never be taken away. But if you're asking me where I want to move my pieces along the board, it's not for the 39-year-old quarterback being able to save the day the same way Gardner Minshew could for as long as he did, where they're one play or change away from making the playoffs a year ago. Shifting over to number 2, I've already said mine, and for the sake of time, since I have been pretty aggressive with the Anthony Richardson conversation of it all, Michael Pittman Jr. for all the reasons Eddie outlined. He is your safety valve. He is your best pass catcher, bar none in the offense. You lose him regardless of who the quarterback is. There's going to be a deficit that you're going to be unable to make up. Eddie, we'll go to you here. Your number 2 on your list of most irreplaceable Colts going into 2024 is?
2 and 3 were very close for me. I present week 18 last season, Julian Blackmon, number 2 for me.
Okay.
You stole my pick.
You both are at Blackmon at 2?
I was at Blackmon at 2.
It's not a I want to clarify that for the audience. It's not a draft. We can share views even though we went, Rams heads together.
I don't want to share views. I'll pick a different candidate. Let's say DeForest Buckner.
I like that. He's on my list for certain.
He's off of mine simply because we don't know what it's like without him.
This is true.
He
plays through everything.
He's missed one game.
Yeah,
I don't want to know. I don't want to know what it's like.
He's one of
him.
those guys where, and it'll probably happen again this season. We'll get to week 7 and he'll stop practicing on Fridays, and I'll tweet out every Friday, "Hey, he's not practicing," and someone will be in my comments freaking out. "Oh my gosh, he's not playing this week," and I'm going to be like, "You would have to be a fool to think that."
Eddie, which burner is that in James mentions? Continue.
But seriously, I mean, the guy plays through everything. And seriously, I mean, obviously I don't take it for granted. I know that there's obviously some issues that could arise for any football player, but when he's on the injury report, he's one of those guys I just have to see on game day that he's inactive for me to believe he's not going to play, and not play well at that. I mean, he goes out there and it just doesn't matter. I remember talking to him a couple seasons ago about an elbow injury he had. I think he tore a ligament in his elbow.
Yep.
I want to say it was a UCL, like a pitching injury. And I was like, "Are you gonna get surgery?" He's like, well, I'm not a pitcher, so it doesn't really matter. I'll just take the offseason and kind of rehab from there, no surgery, and I'll be fine. And I'm like, okay, tough guy. That sounds very football-y and not something that I would do. But it doesn't matter because DeForest Buckner, whether he has one elbow, 2 elbows. I know one time he had this huge pad on his rib cage after a game, knee braces, whatever. He gets it done. He's also just one of the nicest and guys in the locker room as well. So he's a guy I think could seriously, assuming he stays healthy, they make the playoffs, he could be like an all-pro, Pro Bowl guy, because I think he's been that level of player, but just haven't received the recognition for it because the team success hasn't been there.
He is 3rd on my list.
Okay.
Because I had Pittman at 2 and Anthony Richardson at 1. And he's 3rd on there because the Colts are banking so much defensively this season on getting home to the quarterback and not letting, whether they want to admit it or not, the clear weaknesses in the secondary get exposed the way they did a year ago. That is something that needs to be avoided at all costs. It's why you invest your top pick in Leatu Latu, even though he'll be eased in. It's why you're hoping for another jump forward year for Kwity Paye or Dio Odangbo or Samson Ebukam. But much like every other defensive trench in the NFL, and even though you could debate where DeForest Buckner currently ranks at age 30, he's, in my mind, at minimum a top 10 defensive tackle. He is the straw that stirs that drink for their pass rush.
I agree.
Because of how many bodies you have to allocate for him. If he is gone, Eddie's right. We haven't seen it. I don't want to see it. I'm spooked to see it because I don't like how the rest of that machine runs without DeForest Buckner. We'll get more into that list, including Colts players with chips on their shoulder. That'll be discussed as well. But we're going to, James, if I'm not mistaken, take a shift towards a trip to Kansas City, but not for my Chiefs this time. A little Johnny Furphy talk coming up. We'll go to that when we come back after this on Query & Company.
Welcome back to Query and Company on 107.5 The Fan. I'm James Boyd alongside Jimmy Cook and Eddie Garrison here in the DriveHuler.com studio, rocking out on this Wednesday afternoon. We have Shreyas Laddha on the line from the Kansas City Star. He covers Kansas, and he knows a thing or two about the Jayhawks. So, Shreyas, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
I'm glad to have you on, man. Obviously, the biggest news as far as the draft goes for the Pacers was getting Johnny Furphy, which I had to get used to saying because I want to say Murphy so bad. I know you wrote a story recently about him having to wait to the second round and how disappointing that was for him. So I'll start there. How motivated do you think he is to prove that he is a, I guess, ready now NBA player who can help the Pacers next season?
I think very motivated. I think the assumption from his camp and a lot of people around him that he was going to be a top 20 pick. That's what I've heard from draft guys. That's what I heard from his camp. They were very confident that, he worked it with 7 teams at like 9 through 20 range, and he was expecting to potentially be a late lotto or, a pick around 19 or 20. So I think it was kind of a surprise to him, his camp and everything. But I think at the end of the day, like he said it best, the fit is the most important thing. And I look at this Pacers team, big Celtics fan. So I got to see them play up and down against the Celtics all, 4 games long. And I think Johnny's going to fit in really well there. I think his style of play meshes really well. And he's a young player that I think has a lot of growing to do. And I think he would fit right in alongside young guys that Pacers have.
You mentioned the Celtics tie that you have as a Celtics fan, and that's interesting you bring that aspect up because one of the comps that I have seen thrown around, and again, they're just there for reference. They don't mean anything. They don't mean the player's going to be better, worse, or exact to who the player comp is. But I've seen Sam Hauser thrown around as a potential comp to what Johnny Furphy could be. A, do you agree with that comp in terms of what the Pacers are and having somebody that can knock down consistently in catch and shoot situations? And B, regardless if you agree with that or not, what should be expected out of him in his first couple years in the league?
Yeah, I think I kind of have to agree with that comp. Like, I think his three-point shooting can be a little better, and I think with the NBA spacing, it's going to be better for him. I mean, he's killed it in all the drills I heard pre-draft, and I know a lot of people are very impressed with his shooting stroke, et cetera. The one thing I think Sam Hauser does a little bit better than Johnny, and obviously he's an NBA player, but I think he's an underrated defender. I think Johnny has room to work on that end. His lateral quickness needs to improve a little bit, and he's talked about it openly where for him, it's one of the things that he tries his hardest on to work on, to think about, and there were times where he was blown by on drives at Kansas, and, there was a lot of youth and there, but he has the length, I think, and he has the ability to get as a career defender. So the Sam Hauser comp is not a bad comp. And what can you expect of him? I think you expect a guy that can come in and give you some buckets off the bench. He's a really good teammate. He's well-liked in the locker room. He's a little on the quieter side, but once he gets to know you, he opens up a bit. I think he's going to be a guy that if the Pacers develop well, that you could be looking at a plus starter in the next few years. It's just going to take some time because at the end of the day, he hasn't been 6'8", 6'9" for that long. He got his growth spurt in 2021, in the midst of COVID. So a lot of his own journey has been happening kind of out of nowhere.
See, this is the stuff Pacers fans want to hear. Coming off an East Conference Finals run, you add a guy who can help, in the margins, you never know what could happen. So, Shreyas, I do want to pivot to another guy who's going to Kansas, that is Flory Badinga. And those of them around here know him as the great big man from Kokomo High School. I got to see him play myself in person. And Shreyas, when I was watching him here in Indiana, he jumped and just took a kid's shot out the air. He didn't block it. He just grabbed it like Wilt or Dwight or something like that, which is insane to me. So what do you think of his transition from high school to Kansas and how, Bill Self and others can help him get prepared for the next level?
I think it's going to be really exciting. He's one of the nicest kids I've ever talked to. Him, his guardians have been so great. I know his teammates really like him. He's on the quieter side, but every time I've seen highlights, watched him play a little bit, his stuff, I've heard really good things from the coaching staff and just everything that's come out of him so far. It's looks like he's been better than expected in some scrimmages and stuff like that. But he's still raw in some aspects. And kind of the feeling I get is he could be a 2-year guy at Kansas, because I think it takes some time for bigs to develop in college ball. And he hasn't been playing college or basketball for that long, like a lot like Murphy. So I think the expectation is he could be a guy that plays the backup center role for Kansas eventually as the season goes along. And I think Bill Self's going to do a tremendous job of making him a great defensive player, better on the offensive end. I know he's been working on three-point shooting. He's talking about that, but it's not a weakness, rather just something he wants to work on. So if he brings out the three-point shooting aspect in the next 2 years, I think it's going to be really fun and special to watch. And I think he's one of those guys that if he has a good freshman year, you could be talking about lottery contention.
Shreyas Laddha is our guest from the Kansas City Star. Shreyas, the talking point that I've seen the last couple of weeks as we get closer and closer to the start of the college football season, and I know that this is, perhaps not the day-to-day aspects of our conversation on the basketball side, but it does impact the larger implications for the conference of the Big 12. That talking point has been, and there's a lot of factuality to it, the SEC and the Big 10 post-conference realignment have clearly separated themselves, whether it's from a cash standpoint, whether it's from a media rights standpoint, whatever label you want to put on it, they have separated themselves in this conference realignment war. But the Big 12 is still standing tall, still has familiar faces, still has powerful brands within their conference. We don't get that regionally because we're so focused on the Big 10 and to some extent the SEC because they're the cream of the crop. From a Big 12's backyard, how has conference realignment been received, and what are expectations across all of the major sports for the Big 12 in this new conference realignment look that we're going to see this coming season?
I think it's been received really well. There's a lot of excitement from the Arizona schools coming in. I think the Big 12 and its partners have felt that the Arizona schools would bring in a new, viewership and a lot of, kind of sense of multitude of greatness across multiple sports, basketball, football, etc. Colorado with Dion is always a talking point. It gets people, listen, 8 and 11, he's always in the media. And that's never a bad thing. And, obviously Utah, those teams are going to add a lot to the conference. BYU, Utah, in the sense of academically, but also in, basketball and football. I think the expectation is this conference remains the best conference for basketball and college basketball. That's the true separator between the SEC and the Big Ten, in my opinion, is they're by far the best conference, the most competitive conference in basketball. And then you hope that somebody in the Big 12 football-wise gets a little of a run come playoff time. And, this is a 12-team playoff, and honestly, the conference to me is wide open. There's expectations in Kansas that they haven't had in years, where they're going to compete for a Big 12 title. They were picked 4th in the preseason poll, which is their highest pick, I think, since the divisional format happened back in 2011. I think one of those things that there's a lot of excitement around football because we don't really know who could win the conference. Yes, there are some favorites, but I think it's as wide open as it's ever been. And I think that's what makes the conference on the football side fun, alongside the basketball being so high quality and, higher level.
I do want to pivot to football real quick and ask you about Cole Ballard, the son of Colts GM Chris Ballard, playing quarterback at Kansas. What have you seen from him, or what do you actually know about him? I know he hasn't, had been a starter there or anything like that, but obviously we want to keep the local ties in the news. So anything you have on him?
Cole Ballard is one of the most fearless players I've seen out there. I think, he was a third-string walk-on last year, and Kansas dealt with a lot of QB injuries, and they had the starting quarterback only play 3 games, and their backup, who was pretty good, played most of the season, but then he also missed a game and a half. And that game and a half, Cole Ballard played like I've never seen a walk-on play. He played fearless. He was willing to sacrifice his body. I think they have a lot of expectations for Cole because they didn't go to the portal and say, "Oh, Jason Bean is gone. We need to pick up another backup quarterback." They said, "Hey, we gave him a scholarship. He's going to be our backup." And Jalen Daniels has not been healthy in a single one of the seasons, fully healthy for all 12 games. So the expectation is if Jalen is not healthy or healthy enough to go even play the first game, they have a lot of faith in Cole Ballard. I think a lot of times the comparison Lance Leipold has made is he's kind of a gunslinger. He's fearless. He's not afraid of anything. He toes the line between cocky and confidence, I think, in his play. And I think that inspires a lot of, kind of confidence out of his teammates. And every time he's come into play, I've never felt like this guy's a third-string walk-on or, a neckle baby, as some may say. And So it's been cool to watch his growth, and I'm excited to see if he'll be the quarterback in the future. I know they brought in a freshman from Detroit who's super good. So when Jalen probably leaves after this year, it'll probably be battle between Cole and Isaiah Marshall.
Wow, cocky and confident. That sounds like his father. I have to text Chris about this.
Shreyas, the long national nightmare is coming to an end a week from Friday. Of course, I'm referring to us having a college football video game back in our ranks. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. Regardless of whether or not you played the old game, assuming you're familiar with franchise modes and all of that, Indiana as a program in terms of winning percentage is ranked 126th out of all programs, which is, not great. But Kansas is 112th. That same level of kind of mediocrity for most of our lives. If you were to take over Kansas in college football 25, how many seasons would it take you to build them into a college football playoff contender?
I'd say 2. I feel like we're like one step away. I feel like maybe I'm higher this Kansas team than most. But, if they win the Big 12 title, that's a guaranteed playoff spot at that point.
Yeah.
So, I think they're in contention. I think they'll finish top 3, especially if Jalen, a big if Jalen is healthy. I think they will have a really good year this year.
To clarify that, do you think they'll finish top 3? They could in the actual conference, not in the video game.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
wow. All right. Okay. That is something we will definitively follow throughout the course of the season. Thank you so much for making the time for us. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to following the coverage for the Big 12, and enjoy the countdown to college football.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Shreyas Laddha of the Kansas City Star covers football and basketball over there. We're going to step aside. When we come back, we will resume a little bit of our Colts conversation. We talked about hardest to replace. We'll get a little bit later in the show as well. Who has the most to prove going into Colts camp? That's just a couple weeks away. It's Query and Company on the Fan. We do have a halftime score. Washington Mystics 51, Indiana Fever 37. Continue to track that as the day goes on. I will say this, and I've been as hype level supportive as any in just being mesmerized, awestruck, and hyped about the level of attendance numbers that you've seen across the WNBA, especially matchups that feature Fever star Caitlin Clark. We've talked about it, how the highest attended games this year. I can't remember what the figure is now, but at one point it was like 9 of the 10 were Fever games. What is currently taking place from a fan attendance standpoint at Gainbridge Fieldhouse for a WNBA contest, which, again, we've talked about it. I don't want that to sound derogatory because the league has been growing year over year.
Yeah.
It is continuing to raise its standard as a product.
But it's important context.
A year ago, the thought that packed to the rafters Wednesday at noon would be happening, which is what's happening. It looks like a playoff game there. Like, it looks like a Pacers playoff game from attendance. I mean, fans are going to get concessions now. I get that. But when the game was going on, it's crazy, James. Like, and it's not, I don't know that I'm surprised anymore. Like, it is the reality of what this Caitlin Clark train is. And to see the community, and it's not a one-off. That's why it's not a surprise. It's not a one-off situation anymore. It is consistently, whether they are in Gainbridge Fieldhouse or whether they're out to Atlanta or out to LA or wherever, it is a traveling show that you must see. So you get it that it would happen on the road. But to see it not only consistently happen at home, but maybe I'm overreacting because it's the summer, but noon on a Wednesday, that means people took days off. That means people took time out of their day to go. That's awesome. That's so cool. Am I right to not be surprised by it anymore? Or should this still be a kind of jaw-dropping thing?
I don't think you should be surprised, but it can still be jaw-dropping because I told you when we were off air, when I covered Kids Day or Kids Camp Day last year, there were a lot of kids there, a couple thousand, but it wasn't like this where you're seeing, even beyond the kids who are being bussed in for the best field trip ever is what I used to call it. You have a bunch of adults there as well, and it's sold out probably. Looking at the stands when I was watching the game, it looks like if it's not sold out, it's very close. And this is the Caitlin Clark effect. And as I told you when I was walking over, and I tweeted it out, her jersey, T-shirt, whatever you want to call it. Hoodies. I mean, it could be anything.
Any other Funko Pops yet? Do we know? Can we confirm? Okay. All right. Continue.
It's Peyton Manning level as far as the popularity of it. I'm not saying she's as good as Peyton Manning because obviously he's a Hall of Famer.
The merchandise sales are there.
Jake said the same thing, by the way, when she announced she was going to the W. He compared Caitlin Clark to Peyton Manning with the hype and everything that was coming in.
Yeah.
He said probably the most significant number 1 overall selection since Peyton.
Yeah, I wrote a story about this, actually, and I caught some heat for it a little bit because people were like, what about Andrew Luck? And what about Anthony Richardson? And I was like, love Anthony Richardson, but he's definitely not in the conversation.
And he wasn't a number 1 overall pick.
Exactly. But Andrew Luck, I could kind of see because you're trying to, bridge the gap from one great to a next one. But as far as just impact on the city and the cultural phenomenon, she is probably the biggest since Peyton. And I think that the way I'll compare and continue to compare it, she is the Taylor Swift of women's basketball. Wherever she goes, people are losing their minds to see her. And, Kevin Bowen and Andy Sweeney had a chance to talk to her this morning on the Wake Up Show. But it's really cool to see, even when she's talking to them, talk to me, others in the media, she really is as normal as she could be for the level of fame that she has. I think that's a great, example of what you would want out of any superstar in your city. So shout out to Caitlin Clark, man. She's changed things around here for sure. And I just love seeing the joy around women's basketball, what she's done. And then it helps also, in addition to her being here, they've won a lot. I believe they've won 6 of their last 8 games or 6 of their last 9 games coming into today. So, compared to the beginning of the season, they look like a much better team overall.
And that would be a playoff spot if the season ended today, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes, they will be in the playoffs prior to today's game.
Does that we asked Bob Kravis this yesterday. I don't know about this season, and I'm not talking about job security for anybody. I just mean in terms of the sustained attendance, the sustained support, the sustained overall just must see this action on a nightly basis, daily basis, clearly today. Do they have to make the playoffs this year? Do they have to start winning at a high level for the enthusiasm to be sustained?
I think so. I think Caitlin still has some star power that'll last beyond, obviously, this year. But I'll just put it out there. Make the playoffs. I mean, you're there. You've shown that you can play at that level.
Like, does it ever become, and this isn't fair to either player, does it ever become, I'll pose this. There's a question with a parallel to another player that is a star caliber player, undoubtedly. Not the same attendance level, but in the same ballpark, if you will. Perhaps that gave it away. We'll discuss that next, plus a little bit on the Colts as well as we continue our countdown to training camp. James Boyd, to my right, I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison with us as well on Query & Company. Look, he plays the hits, but I got to tip the cap to Eddie Garrison. A little California love for those on the podcast or the podcast center, which, by the way, James had mentioned this. James Boyd to my right. I'm Jimmy Cook. James is in for Jake Query, who has taken his annual adventure to Guaranteed Rate or U.S. Cellular or whatever you want to call it, the White Sox ballpark, to go catch a game today. We did joke about the fact that, Eddie, you mentioned
The dump?
Is that what you were calling Guaranteed Rate?
Yes.
That's not what I was segueing you
Dang.
for, but yes, I'm glad. Just take a stray at the south side of Chicago.
I
That's
was
fine.
talking about the team, not the stadium.
Oh, okay,
I should
that's fine.
say.
I mean, it's not, James, you could speak to it. It's not Wrigley. It's not Fenway. It's just kind of there. Like,
Yeah.
it's not.
I've been there. And
I mean, here's my biggest problem with Guaranteed Rate.
You ate on the street?
No, that was fun. James, I don't know if I told you this story. Me and my wife and one of my best friends, who's also a Yankees fan, we go to
Not me, by the way.
That's
You're
that's
wondering.
True. Eddie hasn't qualified in Tier 1 yet, is what he's saying there, I guess. That was
No,
his
I'm
words,
not a
mine.
Yankees fan. I'm not a Yankees
Oh,
fan.
okay.
That's what it was.
You're not questioning our friendship. That's good. I'm glad that that's not necessarily being questioned on the air. That's good. But no, we always go to a Yankees set every year, whether it's the opportunity to go to Yankee Stadium, whether it's one of the regional teams that are nearby us. We're going to Detroit next month.
Nice.
But I say that because I went to this bar near Guaranteed Rate that we had been to in the past, and I'm going to forget the name of it, so we'll just continue with the story anyway. Turtles Bar and Grill. It's within walking distance of Guaranteed Rate, but they were so packed that we were like, we're not going to be able to find a table. I'll show you the photo after the show. The owner comes out, and again, we're wearing Yankees garb, so could have easily turned us away, and maybe he put us in this spot on the off chance that we might be turned away. He set us up in a crosswalk. He put a table in an active crosswalk in an intersection in Chicago where cars are driving by, and we enjoyed a nice meal. But that wasn't the story I was going to say. My biggest issue with Guaranteed Rate is, and I don't know if they still do this, but they did it 5-10 years ago. If you buy an upper level ticket, they separate you. You can't get back down to the lower level if you're trying to, I can't remember the real technical term, but if you're trying to get down to better seats. This is back when I was in high school and college.
Trying to just move down?
If you're trying to just move down, get a better view.
So you're being dishonest.
Yes. To be clear, I
don't
wasn't,
hate it.
I wasn't dishonest because they wouldn't let me be dishonest because they separate you.
I was going to say, who hasn't done
But
that?
they separate the good concessions. Like you couldn't get the Garrett's Popcorns of the world, or you couldn't get like a delicious Chicago beef or anything like
did
that.
not know this. This is crazy.
So you can't get down to the lower level, and they keep better concessions down to the lower level. So that was my biggest issue with the Guaranteed
see, I
Rate.
thought you were just trying to get better view, because either way, I'm trying to.
For that particular instance, it was both. I'll be honest.
Eddie, he ain't really want it because, he should have just jumped over the rail and did his little parkour. You've been down there in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I had
Could have really impressed the wife to never leave with that hardcore parkour you could have done, Jimmy.
Well, she wasn't there for that particular journey. This was, again, during the high school and college days. Anyway, I digress. That's where Jake is. So we have James Boyd with us in studio. And we had mentioned in segment 1 of the program, if you're just joining us, where have you been? Eddie usually helps Jake with that. He doesn't want to help me there. That's fine. The show's off the rails. We talked about the Colts and players that are irreplaceable going into 2024. And for my list, we'll go around the horn. We had gotten, I believe, to 3. It was
Right.
Anthony Richardson, Michael Pittman Jr., and then maybe I had started us off on number 3. That was DeForest Buckner, because that pass rush is what they're banking on going into 2024. If you take away the general, if you will, the captain of the trenches there in DeForest Buckner, I don't want to know what the rest of that equation looks like because of my fears about the secondary. So for you, remind me, James, where your top 3 were. I can't remember if we had finished with 2 for everybody else and I just gave 3, or if we were at our 3. But where are your top 3 irreplaceable?
I believe those are my 3. Anthony, then I had Michael Pittman, and then I also had DeForest Buckner at 3.
Okay. And then, Eddie, you said that Anthony Richardson belongs nowhere near an irreplaceable list. You said he's a dime a dozen and you could find an Anthony Richardson anywhere.
That's pretty much what he said.
That's what I
Yeah.
No, Eddie didn't go that far. But you mentioned he's not at the top of your list because you have confidence in Joe Flacco. He was your number 1, and then 2 and 3 were...
I don't know if it's more Joe Flacco. I think it's more Shane Steichen
That's
being
fair.
able
That's
to
fair.
replicate offensive success with Flacco.
That's fair.
That's real.
Instead of like some Mike White or somebody like that, you know?
Sure. We already went into that in segment one. I disagree with his ability, not his to do that, but just the compounding of weaknesses on this roster. But I get your point. I understand what you're making there, not solely on Flacco, relying on Steichen. 2 for you was?
Number 2 for me was Julian Blackman.
And then 3?
Bernard Ryman.
For
I like
Ryman,
these picks.
is it elaborate on Ryman because he was just on my outside looking in. I don't fully disagree with you of being in top 5, but for you, he's there. Why?
Who's the backup left tackle?
Great question. In terms of who I mean that is game set match to a point. I don't know. I don't know
Well,
if
it's
you're
probably Blake Freeland,
Yeah,
but yeah,
I mean,
that's
I don't know.
that's a good argument.
Yeah, so
He
it's
needs
like
to be a lawyer.
you look at just Bernard Ryman as it is.
Joe Flacco.
I thought he took a major stride forward last season from his rookie campaign.
I would agree.
He looked good.
And I
Yeah.
think now that he's added the weight from rookie to sophomore year, I think he's only going to get better this year now that he doesn't have to go through all that. He can focus more on technique this entire offseason. Another year with the Shane Steichen offense, getting used to the playbook and how Jonathan Taylor wants him to block, how Anthony Richardson operates when he's in the pocket, hopefully. I know they didn't get a lot of reps last year just because of how short the season was for Anthony Richardson, but as I mentioned to you right there, I don't have any confidence in Blake Freeland as the backup left tackle. And if you're looking at that schedule and you're looking at some of the defenses and pass rushers that the Colts will have to play this season, and Bernard Ryman's not out there, I am a little worried.
James, as the one in the room that covers this team the closest.
I think they're going to ask me the one who could be backup left tackle.
I mean, look, do they still have open tryouts? Maybe you could pull
y'all
some
see,
strings.
y'all see it.
You need a little bit more of that.
He's more of a safety. I don't think he's a left tackle there.
I think you need some more.
Needs to bulk up a little.
You need some more steak pasta if you're going to be headed into the
that is
trenches
true. That is true.
to be a left tackle. But as the one that covers the team the closest, because Eddie brings up a great point. Ryman had a great year last year, and this is the question of that. Was it because of the weaknesses that were elsewhere on this roster, the cornerback room, the struggles in the wide receiver room, not named Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs? I guess I might as well have just phrased it. The struggles of Alec Pierce last year, where the tight end room was, the injury to Anthony Richardson, all those elements. Was it because of that, or was it because this offensive line really did have a bounce back year last year that going into this season, that's not a question mark anymore? A year ago, we were still very worried about which Colts offensive line you were going to get.
Yeah.
That hasn't been a conversation this year. In your mind, is that because they showed real growth and continuity and return to form last year? Or, yeah, they did fine, but there were so many other things to worry about that we haven't talked about the offensive line? Because I think it was a leap forward for them, and I'm really not worried about it this year. As long as everybody stays healthy, which for an O-line group would be remarkable. That's very hard to do in the NFL, that whole room stay healthy.
I'm not too worried about it. I do think that they're going to be in for probably another solid year because of the continuity and because of the coaching change. I know we talked a lot about Shane Steichen, but Tony Sparano Jr. is beloved by that offensive line room. Quentin Nelson loves that dude. I mean, we rarely see Quentin Nelson get very jovial about anything, even after they win. But if you bring up his offensive line coach, he's like, yeah, I like that dude. I'll ride for that dude. And I think he's brought a different dynamic to that room, to that unit, to where we can depend on them to play at a certain level. Now, obviously, health is a factor in that, but I think he deserves a ton of credit for revamping that room as much as the health and things like that.
When we wondered last year, when they bring Tony Sparano Jr. on, what is being said about Sparano Jr. in terms of guys will run through a brick wall for him? He gets the most out of his offensive line room. Look at what he did in New York. Like, he is going to be the guy that has a put up or shut up mentality for the trenches, that you're not going to tolerate lack of effort or steps backward taken. That was all thought of as, is this a narrative, or does this guy really get his position group to play for him? And undoubtedly, I know if you were an assistant coach, you would probably rather your name not be mentioned in the media unless you're ready to take a new position or you're ready for a promotion. You're ready for the next step along the coaching tree ladder, as it were. But that said, as long as it's not negative, like Tony Sparano Jr. deserves flowers for what that group did last year because of there were so many questions. The worried was, did they miss on a selection with Ryman? Like how is he a real answer there?
How about this, Jimmy? And Eddie, you can chime in. Do you remember New York when Kayvon Thibodeau?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that moment?
Yeah.
I was like, Tony Sparano's here. He's got to change that. Like, I don't care about anything else. I get the health standpoint.
Can you elaborate on the moment for those that may not remember?
Sorry, for those listening, there was a moment back in the 2022 season when Nick Foles got hit or sacked or something like that. He was on the ground, and he was in pain. He was writhing in pain. And Kayvon Thibodeau, or for the Giants, basically made fun of him. He was on the ground doing snow angels and replicating the pain that Nick Foles was in, but like taunting him. And no one on the offensive line reacted. I was thinking to myself, someone should have been thrown out of this game. Someone should have jumped on top of him, wrestled him to the ground, did something to at least show that you're there. You're not going to just show up our guy, make fun of him for being injured, and do this Bush League thing. And I thought that was a moment, looking back on it, where the Colts were like little brothered, or like, they got bullied and they did nothing in defense of that. And I thought that was a moment where I'm like, whatever happens, that can't happen again going forward. Whether it's talent, health, whoever's out there has to show more grit than that. And I think that going into the obviously 2023 season, we saw a lot more grit and anger from that group where you didn't see people just, walking all over you.
So much. I know this is obvious for Colts fans, but as somebody that, with our job, we're covering so much. We're going around and we're following the Pacers and the Colts and IU basketball and Purdue basketball and Butler basketball. We're all around, and IU football, Notre Dame football, Purdue football. We're everywhere. And to be clear, like, I love getting to do this job. I love our interaction with our listeners. I love being able to talk about the city that I grew up in that I love. But so much has happened with the Colts. I'll raise my hand with honest. I forgot Nick Foles was here. Like, I remember once you brought it up, but I forgot Nick Foles being a part of this team, being named the starter week 16 of that 2022 campaign. There have been so many partial Band-Aids on this team and so many revolving doors of quarterbacks. It's been well documented, that stretch of different starting quarterback, throughout week ones and openers.
Oh, has it been documented? My goodness.
Has it
Anthony,
ever?
get that shoulder ready, man.
As documented as the losses in Jacksonville, right? Yeah, you gotta make sure he's ready to go. But that's, again, part of the reason why I have him number one on the list of irreplaceable Colts.
Should we let James get the first crack in number 4?
Yeah,
since
because I
he
feel
hasn't
like he
gotten
has.
the
That's
first?
fair. That's a good call. James?
Number 4.
Is this where you go, Julian, since I went Julian number 3?
Yeah,
why
probably Julian
witness?
for me. But if we're thinking of names we haven't said yet, and I'd probably go Kenny Moore. I think he's huge, man. I think from a leadership standpoint, he's one of the best leaders on the team. I think his story, being an undrafted guy and having to grind for everything he's gotten to now being, briefly this summer, the highest paid slot corner in the NFL, that speaks to different players. Like, it's not lip service when Kenny Moore says you have to work hard to get to where you want to go. And then beyond that, the experience factor, because I think I was adding it up. I put a story out about this as far as experience on The Athletic. Kenny Moore has started more games in his career by himself than every other cornerback on the roster combined. And the same thing can be said for Julian Blackmon, if you exclude Ronnie Harrison Jr., who's safety/linebacker, but he's transitioned to linebacker. But like Kenny Moore, it's Kenny Moore and like no one else as far as experience goes. So if he goes down, obviously that would be a huge, huge loss, because he's a great leader. He's also a really good player, borderline Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber player.
Eddie, would you like second crack at?
You can go.
Okay.
We'll save the best for last.
He's getting a little arrogant here, man.
Jake's not
Cocky
here, though.
and confident is what I am.
Jake's not here, though.
I like
don't understand.
that. Word to Chris Ballard and Cole
Exactly.
Ballard.
Say it again. Jake's not here. I don't understand what he means. Best for last. Jake can't participate in this. Anyway, thank you. My fourth selection is a player that you look at his position in the depth chart, and then you look at what's behind him. This is kind of the same Bernard Ryman effect of what Eddie just mentioned. Who's behind him? Who's going to replace him? Number 4 for me is Jonathan Taylor. Because we've talked about it. You can find running backs that can fill a role for you of dime a dozen back, can get you through a game, can take a little bit of pressure off the quarterback. I don't know if they have that behind JT. Like when I look at Trey Sermon or Evan Hull or Tyler Goodson, I don't know who, if any of them, I have the most faith of having a heavy workload as a running back. And what Jonathan Taylor is going to mean to the team this season with a fully healthy campaign in theory, with the dream setup they hope they would have, where you're not having to hand the ball off to him 30, 40 times a game, where you can take pressure off of him because you have Anthony Richardson out there. He is going to be so integral to keeping defenses on their toes with his home run threat, with the feared dynamic duo of Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor together in a backfield, that if you remove him off the board, it's not going to impact Anthony Richardson necessarily, but it impacts the potent nature of what this offense can be. That's why I have him at number 4. Yeah, number 4. That's where we're at. Eddie?
I also had Jonathan Taylor as number 4. You hit on some of the reasons why I had him on there. I think the biggest one for me is, like, you've heard, James, you've talked about this. Stephen Holler's talked about this. Mike Chappell has talked about this when we've had him on the program. The Colts want to be run first. And in order to do that, you're going to have to feed the bell cow, and that's Jonathan Taylor. And you're going to force teams to defend the run first so you can set up the pass. And if Jonathan Taylor's not out there, is that one less guy in the box? Because it's like, okay, we don't have to worry about JT going 60-plus yards to the house, because as you mentioned, the explosive nature of him just being able to take anything and, turn it into a big play. Does that become an extra safety or an extra corner now in the secondary, and then adds another guy to put on Michael Pittman Jr., add Nye Mitchell, Alec Pierce, et cetera, et cetera? And does it make it that much harder for this Colts offense to operate in a passing game it struggled in that aspect last season when Gardner Minshew was in, but we don't have enough to tell with Anthony Richardson just yet, but that's why I would put him over number 5. And my number 5, by the way, was Kenny Moore.
I was going to have you lead off, by the way, but I appreciate you jumping the gun there. Kenny Moore, and for the same reason James outlined?
Yeah, like, even if you look at it from just like a depth chart standpoint, there's not even a backup behind Kenny, and like the added leadership and veteran experience that he brings, like James just mentioned, started more games than the rest of the cornerback room combined. And you said, or is it cornerback or just secondary?
Cornerback room combined.
Yeah, like you need that in the secondary, especially when you're dealing with, a second-year Juju Brents who struggled to stay on the field last year, Jalen Jones, who's probably going to take another step forward, hopefully, this season, and then obviously there's Dallas Flowers still there, but nobody really knows what to expect from him since he's coming off the Achilles injury.
James, you're number 5.
My number 5 was JT. I thought that the player we saw in the season finale last year was all-pro JT. I know he's very hungry to sort of reestablish himself as one of the better running backs in the NFL. Not saying that he hasn't been the last few years, but he's been banged up, and I think he wants to prove that he can be healthy. He's only 25, which is mind-blowing to me, because usually when you're 25, you have not accomplished what JT has already accomplished in the NFL. If you look at the numbers, he's on pace statistically to be the greatest running back in Colts history. Like, that's how good he is. And he's only 25. He's a former rushing champ, and he's only 25. So he's now 3 years removed from that all-pro season, that magical season. Can he get back to that level? I'm not saying he has to go run for, 1,800 yards. I don't think he will ever again with Anthony Richardson as a quarterback, but if he can get to 1,200 yards and, let's say, 11 touchdowns, that wouldn't be a bad season for JT at all. And also not even factoring in his ability to hopefully, enhance the offense as a pass catcher.
Number 5 for me, and I'm in classic me fashion, I'm going to bend the rules a little bit here because I have a tie.
There is no bending of the rules.
Boo.
No, but let
It's
me
top
let me-
5.
I
It's
know,
not
I know.
top 6.
Yeah, but it's 5A and 5B, and I would like to
Does
explain
not
the
count.
rationale why. I'd like
Okay.
to explain the rationale why.
Okay.
Because I agree with the Kenny Moore sentiment of it all. Because if you lose him as the leader of that room, it's dire straits. But I would argue, for all of the same reasons that you outlined, outside of maybe the leadership, because it's too much to ask of this guy in his second year. But I would argue that with how thin that cornerback room is, you lose Kenny Moore or you lose Juju Brents, you are worse off as a secondary because they are that vital to what is going to be asked of them. Now, the argument could be made, you saw life without Juju Brents for stretches last year, and I would say, fine, how'd that go? Wasn't great. That statement does not make me think, you know what? No, it's okay if he's gone.
Those are some tough questions,
it's
tough
not,
locker room scrums.
It's not like the Anthony Richardson thing where you could say, well, how did that go without him? Well, okay, yeah, it did go all right.
Yeah, no,
it went okay.
It didn't go without
But it did
Juju.
not go. So that's why I went 5A and B there. I think.
And they played two different positions.
They do. They're on other sides of the field.
Slot and outside.
You lose either one of those with how thin this cornerback room is, even though Chris Ballard has said time and time again, as recently just a couple months ago, no, this cornerback room, they're improving. They're growing. They're a year better. Okay? How will that look? And how much of it is banking on the health of your two key pieces in Brents and Moore, and how much of it is the guys up front have to get after the quarterback and have to win at a high win rate of pass rush capabilities throughout your schedule. Still on our Colts agenda today, we're going to go through, and perhaps we will tinker with this a little bit in the third segment of the hour, when we will discuss Colts players that have the biggest chip on their shoulder, that have the most to prove going into camp, which is just a couple of weeks away. Additionally, we will, in about 5 minutes from now, discuss with Chris Kamrani, who covers college football for The Athletic. We'll talk about the landscape of college football going into the season. We are at the midsummer point where you can start to feel it. We are just over a month away. We'll call it 6 weeks from college football being back in our lives. Maybe this just happens because the 4th of July has passed, and now you can start to see, sorry to ruin some people's summers here, but this is just how my mind works. You can see the start of the school year, or you can see the start of, like, if you know what I mean? If you have kids, like, you can start to say, and for some parents, it's a good thing, right? You're happy to get the kids out of the house and back into school.
Go to a public school, you get that free child care.
Exactly.
Great.
Exactly. But you can start to feel it. And for some reason on the drive today, I'm looking at, obviously the road, 'cause I'm a safe driver, but stop light, I'm looking at, like, the scenery. You start to see some of the college football flags in certain houses, and you see just the leaves, like all of it. It feels like fall's almost there. So we'll talk about that, but also, and I don't know if I'm the only one in this room that feels this way. I know you don't, James, because we talked about it in the pre-show meetings, but we are a week away from a decades-long drought ending. And that is, of course, the release for the first time in 10 years of a college football video game. Now, I understand that there are people my age, Eddie's age, James' age, for those that we've referenced it a time or two, but I'll be 30 in January. There are people in my age range, above and below it, that video games were a big part of our life. I understand for some of our older audience that maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was with, like...
Yeah, don't let my dad hear this. Boy, you still playing them video games?
Maybe it was with, like, maybe Super Mario Brothers or Atari. Like, right? I've had a conversation with any of my relatives. Oh, man, Atari, it was life-changing. And I know it was at the time, but I promise you we'll have equal parts college football preview, equal parts this game coming back out, because it's a big deal. Like, it is as big of a piece to football culture as Madden is. Like, that's unquestioned. There's a cult-like following for this. James doesn't waste his time like I and Eddie do occasionally playing video games. I'll say because James is on the grind more than we are, I guess. I don't know how to better phrase that. But
I mean,
but your schedule doesn't, like, especially when you're in football season, your schedule as a beat writer, I feel like, does not allow. Like, I'm like, hey, James, you check out this show. Nah, man, I didn't. I'm
when I do check out shows, I'm sacrificing sleep
Right.
and work hours.
Right.
But I think it changed for me when I was in high school. My parents were like, you want clothes or you want video games? I was like, I want to get fly. I want to be fly at school. That's where it changed for me. But I've come around to the fact of just let people enjoy things. So I enjoy seeing the hype around the game. And I do have a lot of fond memories of playing it that we can get into when we get Chris on air. But it's a lot of fun to kind of go down memory lane about it.
And if you're too, I'm not going to advise on screen time here, but if you feel like you're too old for video games, but you have a console, and you have a youngster that likes sports and has played Madden before, introduce them to college football, because it is a bridge to some extent. You start playing the game, and then it's like on a college football Saturday. Oh yeah, that's Arch Manning. I've played him, even though he's not in the game. It was a bad example.
Seriously. He actually is now.
Oh, is he? Did that change? Okay.
Yeah, he is now.
So, but you get my point. It's a thing that transcends both pop culture and sports as it being a sports franchise. So really looking forward to that aspect of it as well. But while we have still a minute or two here, news out of Team USA today that doesn't really impact Tyrese Halliburton necessarily because his spot is secure, but Kawhi Leonard withdraws from Team USA. And while that's disappointing because I love Kawhi Leonard as a player, I love his defensive capabilities.
Hold
on, Jimmy. It's my fault. Should have segued for breaking news.
Shocking news. Kawhi Leonard not a part of Team USA.
All right. That is shocking news. Eddie, additional shocking news. Okay, come on, please. Can I please get the breaking news sounder? Come on, man. What are we doing?
What is happening?
It's all encapsulated in the same news.
It's separate news, separate releases. False. I'm going to go to my newsman to my right. Those are two separate stories. You're writing the story about
that is kind of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Derek White named as his replacement. Now I got to be honest with you. I have admittedly been a bit of a Derek White hater. I don't know what it is.
That's true.
But for some reason, there's just something about his game that doesn't vibe with me. He's an NBA champion now. And the year that he had, especially defensively, was incredible for the Celtics. He's a great piece for them. I'll eat some crow on that regard. But then I'm going to take the crow, and then I'm going to spit it back out at Derek White here.
I was going to ask you, does it taste good?
It wasn't very good. Needed some sauce. If you needed a guy that's going to not be mad about being on the bench and getting 10 minutes a game, Derek White was your guy.
Yeah, and jokes aside, you need some defense. And so I think he can add defensive value, and he can go out there. You could tell him,
he doesn't, I'm sorry to cut across you, but he doesn't change we'll get this from you later, your five guys to end the game.
No.
He's not suddenly in that mix.
No, but you can literally go tell him, hey, don't shoot the ball unless you're wide open and just play.
Be a dog and go limit whoever.
Give 100% on defense and just make sure that the guy doesn't score, and he can do that with the best of them.
Sure. We'll talk more on a little bit of that, Team USA, in the 2 o'clock hour, but we'll step aside now. As we mentioned, college football on the horizon, not just the relaunch of college football as a video game franchise, but college football, the season itself, right around the corner. Chris Kamrani of The Athletic joins us next. along on a Wednesday on Query and Company. We are just over a week away, depending on actually a week away or so. If you are like me and you decided to, James will shake his head at this, but waste money because you've been waiting a decade for a game, and EA Sports markets it in such a way that if you're willing to pay a little bit extra, you can play the game 3 days early. Couldn't be me that possibly did that. That's with college football 25, of course. And as we mentioned, it's a big season across the college football landscape because of the expanded football playoff, because of conference realignment really taking full effect across the Big 12, the Big 10, and the SEC, to name a few. We'll get into that and more with our next guest. He covers college football for The Athletic. He is Chris Kamrani. Chris, happy Wednesday to you. Thank you so much for making the time for us. And we'll start, because I want to save the conference realignment and that active conversation for the second half of this. We will start with the end of our long national nightmare, and that is, of course, college football returning after a decades-long absence. Chris, I said this at the start of the show. I'll be 30 in January, so for me, this is childhood nostalgia combined with I still play video games to this day. I'm very excited about this. For you, and I apologize for putting you on the spot, making the first thing that you share with us be your age, but how old a fella are you, and does this hit home the same way for you that it does for people of my generation?
Yeah, I turned 38 in a few months, and it is a level of nostalgia that ranges from, basically the tail end of the millennial era all the way to the Gen Xers who were playing the Eric Crouch version back in the late 90s. This is something that spawned a tremendous amount of dedication and a fervent following from players and, gamers all around the country. And I think what makes NCAA so unique is that I feel like it was really the first game that allowed fans to kind of sit in the coach's, shoes, don that headset, so to speak, and really try to, quote unquote, build a program the way they see fit. And yeah, it's been a major loss for the, college football culture for the last 11 years, a major loss for the sports gaming community, obviously, but everybody is pretty stoked. And I think, considering where college football is right now, entering probably the most anticipated season ever with the expansion of the college football playoff, you couldn't really think that EA Sports could have drawn it up any better, because I think that this is going to have so much attention, not only from, college football fans, but all the way down to current players, current coaches, former players, you name it. Everybody is kind of waiting at bated breath to finally download this thing.
So, Chris, when I reached out to you yesterday, and I appreciate you coming on, about your story on West Virginia and how dominant they were in this game years and years and years ago, talked to Pat White and others. How cool was that? And it made me think of how unique it is to be a legend, but in a different way, so to speak, as far as a virtual legend, because everyone knows when you chose West Virginia in this game, you were cheating, basically.
For any era that a specific player played, you're going to have come across teams that were quote unquote off limits or cheat codes, or, maybe a friend allowed you to play with them on a special occasion. But for those who never got to play with West Virginia in the 2008 NCAA version of the game, it was like all you had to do is hit turbo, man. Yes, you had to control where those guys were going, but what was unique about that team was they were doing it in real life as well. They were basically kind of changing how college football offenses could be played. And mind you, a lot of people don't know that Pat White wasn't really offered to play quarterback really anywhere else other than West Virginia. He was originally committed to LSU to be a wide receiver. Rich Rodriguez gave Pat White a chance to, help basically rewrite how college football offenses can attack defenses. And they were just fast, man. They were fast in real life. They were fast in the game. They were fun. It was the first team that you could really, basically maneuver guys who had like 95 level speed at any position on the field. And if we're being honest, it wasn't fair. So and there are different eras of this game where, you had the Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, Dwayne Jarrett era of NCAA. You had the Tim Tebow, Percy Harvin era of NCAA. These things are cyclical, obviously, but there was something specific about West Virginia, and maybe that's because it was when I was, in college, and it was just a known fact within your local and, national NCAA circles that the Mountaineers were just too damn good, and they were too fun, and it was just something that, in reporting the story, I found really interesting. It's like all these guys mentioned how, like, if not for their success on the field and eventual success and popularity on the game, like they believe that West Virginia isn't able to continue recruiting the types of top-level talents that eventually came to Morgantown. I mean, like they credited the popularity of that era with getting Geno Smith and Stedman Bailey and Tavon Austin and the list goes on. Those guys saw what you could be on the field, and they saw what you could be on the video game. And I'm fascinated to see with the return of NCAA here in 2024, how that will resonate with younger potential recruits as we enter, their time to start to choose schools.
Chris Kamrani is our guest, covers all things college football for The Athletic. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Chris, a multi-layered question here. I guess a yes or no on the front end. Have you received or played any demos or advanced copies of 25?
I have not. I'm in a much different place than I was back in the day. I have an 18-month-old son.
Yep.
I don't think it would go over well in my household if I had to say, listen, my bosses want me to play this video game for the next several hours and write about it. I mean, that would be cool. And I know that some of our folks, on the college football vertical will eventually get to do so. But I'm just not in that space now. So I haven't been able to play, but it will eventually be one of those things where I have to invite myself over to somebody's house and, kind of say like, let me give it a shot. Let me get on the sticks. So I haven't played it yet, but this has been a very big kind of push for us on the college football vertical, just because there is so much excitement behind it and there's so much nostalgia behind it that it's not just me, it's so many other staff writers, prominent staff writers who are kind of getting behind reporting the nuts and bolts of this whole thing. I think today they released the player ratings, and everybody's going to either clap their hands or be up in arms over that. So there will be, there's always time to argue when it comes to various parts of college football, but NCAA just adds another layer to that.
Baby number one arrives in the Cook household September 27th, so I realize my days on the sticks are numbered as well. So I feel you in that regard. From what you've read, though, you mentioned that West Virginia team from college football, or NCAA football, rather, 2008. Is there a perceived team going into this cycle? And I guess even if you haven't seen ratings, just from the hype around college football in the real world going into this season with the expanded playoff, is there a team you expect to be off limits for this return of college football 25?
That's a fascinating question. I don't think so. And I think it's due to kind of the lack of star power at the quarterback position we have in college football right now. I mean, I think I read somewhere that Shedeur Sanders is going to be the top-rated quarterback on the game, and I think he's supposed to be like a 93, and Shedeur's good. But, like, it's not like it was in, the mid-2000s to late 2000s when you had, definite surefire several potential quarterbacks who are, in the running to go number one overall in the following year's draft. It's going to make everyone have to simultaneously, not do the West Virginia thing and not just turbo with a fast quarterback, but also at the same time, like, you're going to have to figure out who you're going to ride with. And I think that makes it even cooler. Like, if we're talking about the best returning quarterbacks in college football, mentioned Shedeur, Quinn Ewers at Texas, Carson Beck at Georgia. These are all good quarterbacks, but they're not the type of dynamic two-way quarterbacks that we were used to employing on NCAA year in and year out. So I am interested to see who kind of becomes the belle of the ball, so to speak, early on. But the thing that's unique about NCAA, and I don't know if you guys did this when you played, but it's almost cooler for players to find a kind of obscure, Mountain West team or an FCS team and help build them from nothing. And maybe you have a quarterback who is a 90 speed, but like a 60, passer that you can build an offense around. This is something that people who are fans and dedicated, players of this game have been into for a very, very long time. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I don't think there's going to be an off-limit team in this version.
Some of my buddies have been absolutely insane throughout this process. They've made like the graphics, cheap imitation graphics of the 6 schools they're thinking about taking, FAU, like just obscure. So you're right. There is some type of, as I let, James pivot us back to real world college football while we have you, but you're right. There is some level rite of passage of somebody's got to take IU football, or somebody's got to take, just like a lower level, even lower than that, like a mid-major program, where can you elevate them?
Yeah, I mean, Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like off the top of my head, a New Mexico or a North Texas, just the most random program that you can come up with. People are going to be playing with them.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try to make sure that I get some obscure school and possibly, brag about building them up from the ground. That's been the funniest part about all this to me, is just seeing all the memes that people are talking about, like, hey, when I go into a kid's house, how am I going to recruit this kid to come to my program? And it's like, they're actually wearing like real visors, sitting in their living room and things like that. So that'll be fun. I do want to ask you though, with, the actual real football, how different do you think it'll feel with so much conference realignment and just our first iteration of this expanded playoff?
Oh, it's going to be night and day. I mean, listen, we are now no longer a regional sport. I mean, for crying out loud. I mean, I live in Salt Lake City. Utah's going to be playing in Orlando like the 2 days after Thanksgiving, and the game's going to matter. I was in Eugene a couple months ago for doing a couple Oregon stories. Oregon's going to be going to West Lafayette to play Purdue. Like, this is going to be unlike anything we've ever really seen, and I think that only lends to the excitement about who can be in the running come late October, early November, because I feel like for so long we were hitching our wagon to who's going to be the 5th or 6th team that's going to get screwed out and who's going to say, like, we have a better resume. That will probably happen, but it's not going to be close to the same level as it was before. I mean, you're going to have 10-1, 11-0, teams in perceived lower level conferences who are going to go into the last couple weeks of the season with a shot at, an 11 or 12 seed. And how fun is that? Yeah, they might draw, an away game at LSU in the first round, and they might get smoked. But that's the whole point of it, guys. I mean, I think for so long, everything was so predictable. Everything was so regimented. Now we are kind of throwing everything up in the air and seeing how the dust is going to settle, and that's exciting from a fan's perspective. 2
different perspectives for the local college football fan here, highlighting 2 programs that, have intrigue and eyeballs on them for varying reasons. Chris Kamrani of The Athletic is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Those 2 programs with questions surrounding them. What is the level of expectations versus pressure for Marcus Freeman in year 4 at Notre Dame? And what do you perceive the reputation of Indiana football now being with somebody like Kirk Cignetti at the helm, who just, some people bleed excellence. He bleeds that along with confidence. Like, I've never seen somebody as confident as this man. So Notre Dame year 4 with Marcus Freeman, expectations and pressure. And then what is your perception of Indiana football from a national coverage standpoint with Kirk Cignetti now at the helm?
Well, for Marcus and the Irish, I think it's going to this might be falling on deaf ears, but they got to win games that matter, and they have to, like, be in the mix come late October.
Are they toast if they lose at College Station out of the gate, or is the college football playoff allowed them that they could get away with a loss to Texas A&M?
Oh yeah, it'll allow them, but they
Okay.
have to, win. They have to win, the more difficult games on the schedule as the season goes on. That is a very difficult place to play. I mean, I think some people would say it's the hardest place to go play a true road game in college football, maybe outside of Death Valley at LSU. So the fact if you're going to fall short at A&M early on in the season, I don't think you're out of it, and that's the beauty of what we were talking about a second ago. It's like historically, if Notre Dame loses to A&M, maybe we're writing them off. I want to see Notre Dame's offense take its next step. I mean, we saw what they were like last year. Sam Hartman and his gray hair. I get it. He's no longer there. They have to figure out a way to be more dynamic offensively, because it's kind of like a trope, but like their defense is always going to be solid for the most part. But when you're coming up against those blue blood teams that you're supposed to exchange blows with, you got to be able to put points on the board. And I do think, they have a level of continuity from the offensive coordinator position finally, so that they have that going for them. I do think getting Riley Leonard is a huge coup, because he was the most sought after quarterback in the transfer portal. I don't think it was really that close. So he's a proven commodity who's done it at a high level. I just want to see Notre Dame become a little more dynamic offensively and not so, I mean, like I said, falling on deaf ears, like over-relying on the run, let Riley and his, weapons kind of let loose. And in terms of Indiana, like, I have to speak kindly of the Hoosiers because my direct editor at The Athletic is a Hoosier alum, and she's very excited about Kurt's hire. And it's a place that you can – listen, man, I know the Big Ten is a tough place to kind of make that next step, so to speak, but he's been good wherever he's gone, and it's not like Indiana hasn't had its fair share of talented coaches in recent years. I mean, a lot of people don't know that, Kalen DeBoer was in Bloomington for a while before he went, back to Fresno State, and, look at where he is now. So can Indiana take that next step? Can they get in that, 5 to 6 spot in the Big Ten? It's going to be tough because Oregon and Washington are going to be good. I mean, Oregon's going to be a contender, but in terms of the other schools entering the conference on the West Coast, I have so many questions about SC. I think UCLA is going to struggle. Like I mentioned about Washington, I think Jed Fish is a great coach, but he had to basically turn that roster or restock that roster because how many people went pro and left in the portal. So I am interested to see how Kurt's first year in Bloomington goes, because I do think if you can, if you can recruit to what you want to be, and he seems like he's the type of coach that can do that, you can have a shot to exchange some blows with some heavyweights in that conference.
Well, Chris, we appreciate your time, man. Thanks so much for going in depth on the video game and actual real world football. Can't thank you enough. And hopefully you do get a chance to at least get on the sticks at somebody's house, your house. I don't want you to get kicked out of your house, but I'm wishing you the best, my man.
Right. All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. That was Chris Kamrani, covers college football and obviously video games for The Athletic. Pretty good gig. I'll see if I can, slide in there. And hearing that my coworkers get to play video games and write about it. I mean, what am I doing?
That's what's in the game, James. That's
what's
in the game.
Next time I see Caitlin Clark, I'm going to tell her, hey, I need a video game with you in it.
If you self-joked her on yourself. Oh, okay. All right. That's rough. We don't have
I'll let you take this, Jimmy.
We don't have a penalty box. We don't have anywhere to send Eddie. But
you can't hit them. But
you're right. I can't do it. But you have to have a level of objectivity as the CEO of the company. You can't just go self-joke from your forced EA Sports. It's in the game line as we now go to break. Still coming up, we will look at Colts players that have action, mentality, and play on the field to prove with a little chip on their shoulder going into training camp here in a couple of weeks. It's Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. We will keep you up to date on how things are going with the Indiana Fever, but it has been a thrilling one, 85-80 last we saw. James Boyd to my right, Eddie Garrison spinning the great tunes all throughout the day. A little everybody wants to rule the world. Tears for Fears, Eddie Garrison spinning there. That's for the podcast audience, those that cannot hear the music. We're going to talk a lot in the 2 o'clock hour about not just our Colts projections heading into camp, which again, just a couple of weeks away. Be excited to be back out there at Grand Park. There's going to be a wide variety of, which go to 1075thefan.com or follow us on Twitter at 1075thefan for the updates. And of course, you can follow the show as well at query_company and get me at the J Cook, James Boyd at Romeoville Kid, Eddie Garrison at Eddie Garrison _, aka the underscore. And for the scheduling purpose I'm talking about, there's going to be some shows out there at Grand Park like we do every year. So we'll have a formal announcement about that as we get closer, but it's always a great time to be out there, a part of Colts camp and the fan engagement, everything top shelf across the board.
You know, Jimmy, rumor has it that our great fan base that we have here at Querying Company, all 7 listeners,
yes,
they can see us before that, right? They
will be able to see us before that, of
potentially
course.
No, just once, not twice.
Yeah, just once between now and then. But that is, of course, is the Fan on the Back Nine Golf and Entertainment Center is our host of the the Fan on the Back Nine.
James, you're going to be there, right?
Yes, I will be there.
James is going to be there as well. The Fan on the Back Nine Golf Tournament presented by Franciscan Health. That is Thursday, July 18th, just outside of a week from now. It's going to be an afternoon of golf, beer, food, beer, tournament-style games.
Jack Daniels
across the board. Diet Coke's perfectly sufficient, of course. Back Nine Golf and Entertainment Center with the whole fan crew. That's going to be action getting started at 11 a.m., with things officially kicking off at noon. Of course, a silent auction to benefit Franciscan Health Foundation featuring sports memorabilia, one-of-a-kind experiences, and there could be live shows out there as well.
That's right.
Query and Company will be on site from noon to 3, JMV from 3 until 6. Rain or shine, this event is going to go down. If you're still trying to get tickets, we are on our last bit of tickets here. Go to 1075thefan.com.
Better scurry.
And get your tickets now.
Come hang out with the squad
while you can, as this is going to be a fun-filled day, a great opportunity. We often have so many PTO days to use. If you're looking for one, just a way to play a little bit of hooky from work and hang out with your friends over here at the Fan, that is the time to do it. Again, Thursday, July 18th, just over a week from now, a week from tomorrow, in fact.
That is right.
Get your tickets at 1075thefan.com. As we mentioned, still to come, we will have a conversation regarding not just expectations for Colts camp, but also Tyrese Halliburton, Team USA, their first showcase game as they have a tune-up towards the Olympics when they'll be in Paris a couple weeks from now. It takes place tonight in Las Vegas against Canada. We'll get in that with Ben Golliver of the Washington Post at 1:30. But when we come back, we're on Colts training camp. What James expects, Eddie expects, myself, what we all expect, and who has the most to prove going into camp 2024 here on Query & Company. So Jake is out today. James Boyd of The Athletic is in, one of our favorites. I am Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison guiding us behind the ones and twos. You'll hear from him a little bit more. Where did I kiss up there?
One of our favorites.
Why, he is.
I am.
James,
See, I think
I
that's-
could run for mayor right now.
I can go
If
on the
you
record.
want to
but it'll
fully
be
live up
close.
to them, I say he is the favorite.
Well, but I
Not
didn't want
one
to. I
of.
didn't want to live up to that because there's other hardworking media members in this market that are one of my favorites in that group. James is one of them. Also,
Eddie, just don't
I
be
think
like
we
that,
should be
man.
rolling out the red carpet for our friends when they're here in studio. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't take me for
I would
granted,
agree.
Eddie. You know, this is
I
greatness
don't.
personified.
that's facts. FAX.
I ain't
Is that
look-
how they spell it these days?
Yeah, that's how I spell it.
The kids,
Hashtag
the
facts.
trend, what's hip,
Oh, Lord. Eddie, you sound older than me.
the lingo,
Okay. All right. Moving on.
youngsters.
Any more?
No, I'm good.
All right.
Whippersnappers.
Thank you.
All right. I'm done.
Jake's in Chicago, and Eddie,
Yes.
you'd mentioned this to me that it's a White Sox game, but we were worried about if his game, which was supposed to be during the day, was going to get rain affected, a rain delay.
Correct.
But it in fact happened last night. Last night's White Sox game
That
gets
is true.
postponed
Yes.
to the afternoon.
Correct.
And so Jake's game now gets moved to 30 minutes to an hour, whatever, afterwards
That is correct.
with a doubleheader.
You are on point.
Now, here's the question that I propose to you two. Do you think that A, the White Sox, being, last I checked, the worst team in baseball, I don't know if they still hold that record, but they were there.
The Miami Marlins are right there, Jimmy.
They're hold my beer mentality. Eddie's Miami Marlins are right there.
Literally holding my beer.
It was a beer bet, and Eddie is in a distant third of the Cleveland Guardians and Milwaukee Brewers.
I thought that the object was least wins here, but
It's all right.
it's okay.
Sometimes you get the game rules confused. That's fine. Does Jake try to go to the first game? And more importantly, with the White Sox attendance being what it is for a whatever pitch time on a Wednesday, do the White Sox say, hey, if you're holding a ticket for that second game, feel free to come to the first game because nobody's going to show up anyway?
Good question. I'll let Eddie weigh in on this.
So
He's a
game
baseball
one
guy.
is at 2:10. Game two is slated for 5:10.
It's 2:10 Eastern, correct?
That is nice job, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Yes.
There's a time zone difference there. Just making sure. Make sure we're all on the same page.
Even though we're in the Eastern, that's totally fine.
But they're not. They're Central Time, so I just want to make sure.
Why would I say the game's at
Because
1:10
has this
Central?
happened to you? Has this happened to you?
This
You've
actually has
Googled
happened
a
to me.
game time, and then you don't read it, and it actually says Central on the Google search bar. You're like, oh, why does it
Yeah.
say Central?
Fun
That's
fact.
Hold on. You Google a game time when you have an ESPN app you can go to, and it does the same thing.
You can use any app you want. I just happen to use
Uh,
Google.
All right. Now back to the.
Back to the point. Are you trying, if you're Jake Query, because you're just going to see it for the novelty of it, because you go with a group of friends, you and Shannon go together, and I believe another couple, if I'm not mistaken. Are you trying to get out of White Sox game early by trying to go to that early game, or are you letting the fates play out and going to your scheduled game, which has been moved to 4 in the afternoon or whatever?
Early game.
Me too.
Early game. And
Me
then
too.
the quicker you can get out of downtown Chicago, the better, because trying to leave.
You would know, right?
Oh, I definitely know. You leave downtown Chicago after a 4 o'clock baseball game, and good luck moving your car anywhere. I mean, you
Yeah.
might as well just spend the rest of the night there. It takes forever to get
in
out
the
of
one
that
year
zone.
in the 1 year that I lived there in Chicago, which I greatly loved. I've always loved big
Oh, it's a
cities.
great
Like
city.
it was awesome. I couldn't afford to live there now because rent has skyrocketed, but neither here nor there. Yeah, you try to get anywhere on a game day, well, it's disastrous if you're trying to do it with your car.
Yeah, you're better
Can't
off
be done.
riding the L or riding the bus, the CTA. Shout out to the CTA and the L, baby. Got me and my grandma where we had to go when I was a kid.
I have a weird fascination with public transit, but public transit that involves rail cars or subways. Meaning, like, not buses. No disrespect to the fine folks at Indigo, but like the metro itself idea of it, or CTA, or it's the metro in DC. Like, that stuff fascinates me. As somebody that, grew up near and around Chicago, were you ever fascinated by subway cars and trains, stuff like that?
Yeah,
or is it just a way to get about and
I spent all
whatever?
my summers in Chicago and with my grandma, and I loved it because I thought it was so cool that you could get somewhere without having to have a car.
Right.
And growing up in the suburbs with my parents, you needed a car to go everywhere. And I thought it was just so cool that you didn't have to have a car. And you don't have to be bothered with, okay, where do I park the car when I finally get to where I want to go? You can
Right.
just, hands off, you're good to go. You got your stuff and you can keep rolling. So I have a deep appreciation for public transportation, mainly because it's affordable most of the time and it gets you from point A to point B. It's funny because, fun fact, me, Joel Erickson, and Nate Atkins of Indy Star took a train back from the stadium in Germany.
Nice. I love European transit. It's the best.
And it brought us within like a block of our hotel.
It's great.
And we knew it was the right stop because it was the only one in English. And we were thinking, don't miss this stop because if you miss this one, good luck trying to find your way back. But yeah, that was a fun experience.
He is James Boyd. Again, you can follow him on Twitter at Romeoville Kid. Covers all things Indy, but especially the Colts beat writer for The Athletic. And resuming our Colts conversation a little bit earlier, we looked at the most irreplaceable Colts going into 2024. Now let's shift gears to where it's a proving ground for this roster. Areas that have chips on their shoulder, high expectations, a top 4 or 5, if you will, of guys that have the most to prove going to camp 2024. Since I led off the last time, James will allow you it's not really selection, but we'll let you have first say of who your number one, this guy has the most to prove going into 2024.
Alec Pierce has to be number one on that list, in my opinion, because everyone in my Twitter mentions these days is saying he lost his job already. And I'm like, that's not how it works. You have to go out there and compete. And again, everyone, not everyone, but players look great in camp. And I'm not saying A.D. Mitchell is just a camp player. He's probably a very good player on regular Sundays, but he hasn't played any yet. And so I think that Alec Pierce has something to prove. I asked him that. And he told me that point blank. It's my job to go out there and prove that I am our, third starting receiver. I am our deep threat guy. And so I'm excited to see them duke it out throughout training camp and obviously throughout the season, because I think either way it goes, whoever ends up, atop the other on the depth chart, they're going to get big snaps anyways, because I think Shane would appreciate being able to rotate different guys in and out. And if both of those guys can step up and have big seasons, that'd be big for the Colts. But I think that's position group, that matchup in particular, A.D. Mitchell, Alec Pierce, with Alec having the most to prove, is the most obvious answer I can give you.
Eddie Garrison, let you have second bite at the apple here. The top player on the Colts roster with the most to prove in 2024 is?
Alec Pierce.
For the same reasons?
Yep.
Do you want to expand any more, or do you want to let us move along?
Move along.
I actually want a quick follow-up to that. Who's your dark horse?
My dark horse, what do you mean?
Like outside
Dark
looking
horse,
in, you mean? Not quite at the top 5, but there?
Yeah, but like someone you're like could have a sneaky important season for the Colts.
Dio Ndengbo.
I like that pick.
He gets so overlooked along that defensive line group. Everyone wants to talk about Buckner and Stewart and Quiddy and Ebukam and Leatu Latu. Nobody talks about Dio. He was so consistent and so disruptive the second half of the season last year. I don't think people give him enough credit for what he did last year. And I think he's a key part of that defensive line moving forward.
I would argue that.
And he's a upcoming free agent after the season, right? Contract year?
I was going to bring that up. I was like, he is in a unique position where he wants to get paid, obviously. But if he plays too well, he could price himself out of Indianapolis's market.
Yeah.
So that's it's a unique dynamic. He says he didn't worry about his contract, but we all know players love contracts and they have to, pay attention to that.
Jimmy.
Do we have a quick breaking news sound ready?
I'm glad you said
Here he goes.
So I'm going to count this as a response to the conversation we were having. I don't even know if Jake's tuned in or been a spy today and listened, but James, I apologize. I can kiss up to you as much as I would allegedly like to per Eddie, but you've not reached the level of status to be a part of the company boardroom chat. That's just for the CEO, the president, the chairman of the board. But in that group chat, Jake sent us a picture of Shannon currently inside guaranteed rate, which would mean they went to the early game.
Boom.
Also, Angel Reese's double-double streak extends to another game.
Wow.
but it is the most not good way because the Chicago Sky have the ball with 6 seconds left and they're up by 7. She draws a foul to go to the line with 9 points and makes both free throws.
You know what? Okay, let's talk about this. I actually don't hate this. And not because it's Angel Reese, but, man, there have been times I'm watching a game and I'm like, can you just leave this player in because this is historic? And they don't do it.
No one ever does it.
Like when Klay Thompson had 60 points and 11 dribbles, I'm like, can you leave him in? I want to see if he's going to score 80 tonight.
Here's the only way I'm not mad about it. And I want to get to my Colts, all of our Colts list, but I haven't given you my number one or my dark horse yet. But I don't think it's a real conversation. And we don't have enough showtime to get into this, but we talked about it yesterday. Again, I think it was with Bob Kravitz. I don't think the Rookie of the Year thing is close. I think it's clearly Caitlin Clark.
Ooh, I like this debate. I think it is close.
And while the streak that she is on is impressive, of Angel Reese, of the double-double extension streak of most in WNBA history, I'm not knocking this. I told you last time you were in here, I don't like Angel Reese because how good she is. I think she's incredibly talented.
Very honest.
I admire every aspect of her game. But it frustrates me because she's so. Everybody has that. Everybody has because they're rivals. It's a budding rivalry. We know what it is. I know Caitlin Clark leads in almost, outside of rebounding, almost every category among rookies. She just had the first triple-double by rookie in WNBA history. I think it's being made more narrative-driven. That it's to make ratings, to make everything increase, to get as much as you can for this budding rivalry that is real, purporting that the race is closer than it actually is. I'll give James, I want you to respond to that, but I do want to get back to the Colts list. But
go ahead.
No, I want to get your take on that first. Am I crazy for thinking, like, maybe it's perceived close, but I really think she, being Caitlin Clark, is the clear-cut Rookie of the Year if it ended today.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I think if it ended today, it probably will be Angel Reese.
You think she'd get it outright?
If it ended today, yes, because she's coming off winning Rookie of the Month, and I know Caitlin won it the first month of the season.
Sure.
But she was the most recent winner. She also was just named Eastern Conference Player of the Week. Well, not Rookie of the Week, Player of the Week, after having a dominant week last week. And then I think the playoff implications might matter as well. So if Angel keeps his streak up, and she's become more efficient too. I know people making fun of her early in the season. She hasn't been nearly as inefficient as she was early on. Her game has gotten a lot better. If she stays efficient offensively, continues to rebound the basketball, and the Sky get in the playoffs, let's say over the Fever, I think you have a very sound argument to make that she is the Rookie of the Year. Now, I understand what you're saying, and I think that Caitlin, in a vacuum, you probably want her to start your team, and she's the better player.
Sure. And when you look at it on paper, just from statistics alone, I understand there are nuances to it, like you mentioned, being a playoff team,
right?
Having key moments, signature moments in your season. But if you look at it just from a statistical standpoint, and this is great for the WNBA, because you want to have this level of discussion for your top-tier awards.
Right.
Again, outside of rebounding, she's clear in most
But here's
categories.
my other thing, and I'll give Caitlin credit. She's gotten better defensively, but she's also not the level of defender that Angel Reese is.
Fair.
And so I think that part of it, people are like, oh, well, every stat she leads her in, it's like, well, but there's no stat really for how good you are as a defender.
That's fair.
And so I think that side of the ball, Angel's still a ways away or ways ahead of than Caitlin is as far as defense goes. So I think it's a great debate. I go back and forth every other day because, we got one day Angel Reese is keeping the streak alive. Then the next day you have, like Caitlin Clark today had a stat line that never been put together, I believe, in WNBA history. 25 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, 5 rebounds, 5 steals, and a couple of blocks. And I'm like, she's just all over the place doing everything. And so, again, if you get to the end of the season and you tell me Caitlin Clark's Rookie of the Year, great. I agree. You get to the end of the year and tell me Angel Reese is Rookie of the Year, I'm saying great, I agree. So I think it'll come down. You view it
as a close race.
I do. I truly do. And I do think it'll come down to, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I think it'll come down to at least some factor of how did your team do playoff-wise and playoff seeding. I know people are saying, well, it's an individual award, but how do we actually grade great players? We don't grade them just off stats. We grade them off, do you impact winning? And keep in mind, the Chicago Sky were supposed to be like garbage this year, like trash. Not even as good as the Fever,
Sure.
because they got rid of everybody and they reloaded. And then here comes Angel Reese,
Sure.
showing that she should have been probably the number 2 pick instead of the number 7 pick. So I'm excited to see where it goes from here.
I will say, as we pivot back to the Colts, that to the point about how much should winning matter for an individual award, if we're saying it does matter, then I would need to see, even though it was in a losing effort today, Fever fall 89-84 to the Washington Mystics, but outscore them 29-13 in the fourth, and we're right there late. I need to see Angel Reese, which there has been instances, but I need to see her being the leader of the sky down the stretch. To be clear, I'm not saying she's not doing that now. I mean, in 6 weeks from now, whenever the regular season ends, if the barometer is sky in, Fever out, like it's for that last spot, let's say it's where they're fighting, it would have to be definitive to me that Reese impacted the winning way of the sky to get them to that point.
That's fair, because I can't discredit also on her team. Kennedy Carter's been playing outstanding basketball as well. She had a 30-point game the other day. So, again, the fact that we're even having these conversations is incredible. And like I said, downtown Indy, when Caitlin Clark plays, is like another planet. I've never seen so much red in my life, and I've enjoyed it just because I think the city embraces that. This is a city that loves basketball. Obviously, you know what Peyton Manning did for the city. We're getting back to the Colts talk, but obviously, when you have a player of her caliber in the city, it can only do good things for Indianapolis.
So with our Colts players with the most to prove, a top 5, if you will, of players the most to prove going into camp 2024, you both went Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce is on my list, but he's not my number 1.
Ooh, I'm actually surprised.
My number 1 is, in fact, the same player that was my number 1 with the irreplaceable list, and that is Anthony Richardson. Because,
okay,
James, you mentioned it earlier.
I like this.
In the same way with Jarris Walker on the Pacers side, that you can't cleanly give an answer of what kind of player the person is because of lack of playing time. For Walker, it wasn't health. It was just situational logjam in front of him. For Richardson, it was. Even though there were flashes of, oh my gosh, you see that throw? You believe the window he placed that in? Oh, the athleticism. Even though there were flashes of that with Richardson, every question mark that was still there when they drafted him didn't go away. At least in terms of if you're in the doubting Thomas camp where you need to see it. We've heard it's changed. We've heard, his IQ and the way he's like a sponge, soaked up all the knowledge from Shane Steichen in that quarterback room. Like, he's ready to go. And by the way, I'm an Anthony Richardson believer in this camp. I believe he is ready to go, but that chip is still there.
Yeah,
because if let's say he's healthy, and he underperforms, I'm not saying you're getting boo birds right away, but it would be crushing for the franchise if the biggest question about him has been what? Health. If that question gets answered and it's a rough rookie campaign, or not, de facto season. Rookie, but second season in the league, that would be, to me, the biggest chip of all.
That's the point I was making earlier about the honeymoon stage. I think the honeymoon stage ends after training camp, when we get to him actually taking real snaps in real games. I cannot wait. If he plays it all throughout the preseason, which I think he'll probably maybe play the first game. I don't know about the last one. Get him in for a quarter, not even a half. Just get him in there for a quarter, a couple of series. It's going to be so funny when he throws an incomplete pass or he throws an interception and everyone just pounces on whatever happens. Even if he throws a touchdown, he's going to be, he's a god. And then if he throws an interception, he's a bust. And so I'm curious to see exactly how does he ride the waves of what will be potentially a fruitful but yet still humbling season, because to me, he's going to have a bad game. He's going to have a couple of bad games because that's the NFL, and it happens to even great players. It's just when we look back at the totality of the season, will you be able to say, hey, this guy is a player? There are moments where he looked like he was, in over his head, but overall, this was very promising. And like you said, I think the honeymoon stage ends if he comes out here and he underperforms, but he's played, 15 games and up.
I want to snake draft around, and just to continue to move things along, my number 2 is Alec Pierce for all the reasons that you outlined. I think that maybe I was one of those people, just kidding, but on a burner in James's mention saying, he's already lost the job. It's A.D. Mitchell's now after, the brief mini camp and OTAs. It still has to be earned, but that's the pressure that's on Pierce. all I'm hearing for Alec Pierce of reasons to have faith is he needs a strong-armed quarterback to be successful, and he hasn't had that. Now he has it with Anthony Richardson. Okay, then this is put up or shut up for me with Alec Pierce. He'd be my number 2. James, for you, second player with a chip on their shoulder going into 2024.
Man, that's a great question. I'm going to go Jonathan Taylor because we heard everything under the sun about him last summer. Is he worth this money? Should they trade him? He requested a trade. They explored trade options. He stayed put. He got his money. That contract kicks in this year. You're going to get paid big money this year. It's time for you to prove that you're worth it, that you are worth all of the headaches that occurred last summer. And like I told you, he's still a great player. And unfortunately for me, selfishly, I haven't really seen it that much because since I joined the beat, for those listening, I officially started working and covering the Colts in 2022, the year after his rushing title, and when he started to get dinged up and things like that. So I didn't see peak JT until the final game of last year. I was like, oh, this is the player everyone's been telling me about. And now I'm curious if we can see it at a sustained level and really just being healthy enough to get through the season, because I think that dude is special. And I get it. When you have a dual threat quarterback, usually it doesn't matter too much who's back there in the backfield. You can produce running yards. But when you supercharge that with an all-pro caliber player, I can only imagine the things that they can do together.
Eddie, you're second.
When I'm thinking of this list, I'm thinking of players that can that if they don't have a good year because they didn't prove it, they're being replaced.
Ooh, okay. I like your angle with this.
So that's why I don't have Richardson or JT on my list, because I don't think either of those players are being replaced next season if, let's say, Richardson does get hurt, but it's it's a non-contact injury or something like that.
I don't know
Whereas
how
all
real
these other ones have been hits.
Sure. I don't know how real this is because I don't have connections, like deep connections in the Colts front office. But if he's healthy and doesn't perform, I don't mean de facto rookie struggles. I mean he looks bad, which would be worse than he did in the spurts last year. I'm talking inaccuracy over the place. You don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, there's real worry in the Colts front office. I would argue Richardson's not getting replaced next year, certainly. But quarterback shelf life and patience in today's NFL is far shorter than it was a decade ago. So I don't know that he's fully off of that list. But, Eddie, I do get the caveat there that you're putting your second, by the way, your number 2 on
in
connection
with the dark horse of Dio Adangbo, I think number 2 to prove for me is Kwity Paye. They pick up the 5th-year option. He's going to get paid $13.4 million next season.
Right.
You draft Laiatu Latu. So there's a lot of pressure. I mean, Samson Ebukam produced last season.
And he's going into he might have one more year on his contract.
Ebukam has this is year 2 of 3.
Next year, right.
Yeah. So if you're looking at it from the Kwity Paye perspective, like, if you don't go out there and produce, I mean, you're getting paid $13.4 million next year, and you're more than likely not going to be in a starting role. Like, if you don't go out there and produce this year as a pass rusher, then when are you going to do it?
So sticking to his theme of under the radar type players, and I don't even know if he's under the radar. I would go, maybe I can, realign my list, and I'll say that Nick Cross.
This is 3 for you, or you're moving him
3
up?
or 2.
Okay.
I mean, whichever one you want to pick. He could be number 1, considering that they need a free safety so badly.
Sure.
He has a lot to prove to me because, to Eddie's point, they traded up to draft him in the 3rd round.
He was my number 3.
In 2022, he started 4 games since then.
Yeah.
He started the first 2 games of his rookie year, got replaced by Rodney McLeod, and he started the last 2 games of last year because Julian Blackmon got hurt. That was the only reason he played.
I do remember when they drafted him and Chris Ballard said that he left probably a year early, but they love his traits and they love, like, his character and everything, the typical Ballard
They
stuff.
thought he was a first-round talent a year early, and we have hardly seen him on the field. So to me, you have a position battle. It's wide open between you and Rodney Thomas. You have to show me something at this point to prove that it was worth it, or we have to admit we traded up to draft you and we missed terribly.
There is something that I'm chuckling about that has to do with Jake Query that I will share a little bit later in the show. We will also continue with our lists after our next segment, where we position ourselves getting ready for Team USA as they have their first of a couple tune-up games in preparation for the Olympics in Paris in just a couple of weeks. They're out in Las Vegas right now. They'll play Canada tonight in the first of those U.S. showcase matchups. Ben Golliver, who covers all things basketball, all things Team USA, he's in Vegas right now with the Washington Post on the beat there. We'll get his perspective on not just Tyrese Halliburton, where he could be within Team USA, but how the practices are going as a whole. That conversation next here on Query & Company.
I love this kind of music, man. This is my type of vibe right here.
Well, Elvis, baby.
There we go. You're listening to Query and Company on 107.5 The Fan. I'm James Boyd, hanging out with my buddies, Jimmy Cook, my co-host, and also Eddie Garris on the ones and twos.
Hey, buddy.
I didn't know we were reintroducing ourselves, but hello, everybody.
Yes. Last 30 minutes or so of the show. It's been fun so far. We're going to end it off with our last guest of the day, Ben Golliver from the Washington Post. Ben, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you hitting me back. I shot him a DM. We had followed each other for a long time, and I've read Ben's work for years now, and we kind of connected when I was doing Pacer stuff. So I'm not as thrilled to not be in Vegas right now. I would love to be in Vegas covering Team USA and things of that nature. But I have to ask, and I'll start with, how has Tyrese Halliburton looked, the Indiana Golden Boy, with Team USA so far?
Well, it's going to be a little bit of a different role for him, I think, this year compared to last summer. I thought on the FIBA World Cup team, he was like really, really, really important. He's kind of a central piece. And even though he didn't always start, he was leading that second unit, setting the pace, getting them playing up and down. And that was when they were at their best, I thought. It was kind of a disappointing run by the end of it, but he had a real breakout performance, I thought, for them. And there was a reason why he got invited back to play with the senior team. The identity of the senior team, let's put the emphasis on senior, right? I mean, you got LeBron, you got Steph, you got Kevin Durant, you got three guys who are kind of in their mid to late 30s.
Yeah, senior
That's
citizens.
The core of this group, and everybody else is fitting in around those guys. So I think that there's going to be a role for Tyrese, leading a bench unit and trying to, play that up-tempo style with maybe some of the other younger players with this group. But there's no question about it. The headliners are the guys who are kind of dictating this year's identity, and it's going to look different than last summer. It's not going to be as versatile. It's not going to be as up-tempo. I think it's going to be a more, a bully type approach, right? You got Embiid in the middle. You got Anthony Davis on the front line. You got the three older stars. I think they're really going to try to intimidate teams and try to bully teams down low.
Ben Golliver is our guest, writer for the Washington Post out in Las Vegas covering Team USA. He joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Ben, we had this conversation earlier in the week looking at the Team USA roster and looking at maybe who your starting five are or who is in crunch time moments. And we were trying to find the place for Tyrese Halliburton. You mentioned he has second unit experience, certainly dating back to his FIBA days. He is, even though we hate on him occasionally for it, we'd like him to be more aggressive in NBA games. He is the quintessential pass-first point guard. When you look at this roster, who is that floor general? It's probably not Halliburton, I would assume, in the starting five, but is it a LeBron James because of his willingness to be that passer mentality guy? Is it one of their true guards on the roster? Who do you imagine is being the facilitator versus the I need to go get mine guy on this team?
I mean, you guys won't believe it, but LeBron wants the ball in his hands with this group, with every group, right? I mean, it's going to be LeBron's team. That's sort of how it was shaping up during the practices. I think he's going to kind of play a point-forward role.
Yep. And
they've got a lot of shooters, including Halliburton, around him. And so I think that's really where it's going to come in, not only setting the tempo when he's in there with the second unit, and that's going to probably be his main job, but also I think, spacing the court and making catch-and-shoot shots. We heard Steph Curry himself talk about, getting more into a catch-and-shoot type role. Players like Jason Tatum and Kevin Durant, those are great catch-and-shoot options playing off of LeBron. So I think that's probably going to be the main look on offense. But they also want to dump the ball to the post a little bit to Embiid, too. I think what they're realizing is if you put him on the block and surround him by four shooters, and that's something that Philadelphia has really never been able to do, right? He plays so much on the perimeter in the NBA. Now you've got to force teams to decide to double team him or not. If you double him, you're leaving really, really good all-NBA level players wide open. If you don't double him, he's going to go straight to the free throw line. He's going to go straight to the rim, right? So those are going to be great opportunities for USA. I do think they're going to play a little bit more inside out with Embiid, maybe than they have in some past years. But, you're looking at the starting lineup. You were asking that. I think it's going to be LeBron, Steph, and KD once KD's back healthy. Those three guys are going to have lock spots. I think there's a really good chance Embiid starts inside. And that last spot, if it was me, I would probably go Tatum out of respect to winning the championship, out of respect to him being a really good floor-spacing shooter, a guy who doesn't necessarily need to be ball dominant. I would save Anthony Edwards for the second unit and have him run alongside Halliburton and just get real electric in transition and really try to run other teams off the court with that younger group. That's how I would do it. We'll see what Steve Kerr has up his sleeve. Anthony Edwards made the joke that he's the number one option on this team, and nobody besides Anthony Edwards believes him on that. But Kerr did respect that mentality, and what we saw happen last summer is that Anthony Edwards, kind of through force of his will, was able to push his way into the starting group. So, history could repeat itself. We'll see. With Kawhi Leonard withdrawing, also one other thing to consider, they're a little bit short on the wing now because they replaced him with the guard and Derek White, and Kawhi's been dealing with some knee injuries, and that's why he had to kind of back out here this morning. I think that could make the argument you save Tatum for the second unit because you only really have two true wings in Durant and Tatum. You might want to split those guys' minutes up. We'll see how they break it down. Kerr has been very tight-lipped when it comes to strategy and when it comes to lineups, even more so than usual. I wonder if he's feeling the pressure a little bit to deliver gold here because they only got fourth place in last year's World Cup.
I do want to ask about Steph Curry, his first time being an Olympian, which sounds crazy, but when you think about how his career has gone, started off a bit slower because of the injuries, and obviously he was banged up at a few of these and did not participate. But how has he embraced that first stint so far with, Team USA on the Olympic scale?
Oh, it's a great question, and it's hilarious because Steph said the other day, he's like, man, I had jitters before the first practice. He's like, I'm going to have jitters before the exhibition game tonight against Canada here in Las Vegas. Like, he's that locked in. He's that excited to do it because he's never had the opportunity before. It's not only his first dance, but it's probably going to be his last dance too, right? Like, it's a pretty good chance LeBron, KD, and Steph won't be back playing in the Olympics 4 years from now in Las Vegas. So there's some real stakes for Steph to kind of add that Olympic gold medal, which is really the only thing missing from his resume now that he got the Finals MVP in 2022, right? So I think he's very excited. The other interesting thing, you always hear these stories coming out of USA Basketball over the years about who are the veterans who are setting the tone, who are kind of letting the other players know how hard you need to work to be great. Kobe Bryant would always get that kind of talk. Michael Jordan, of course, would get that talk before him. Steph Curry, after every single one of these practices the last 4 days, has gone through his extensive shooting routine, and I'm sure you guys have seen it before games where he just kind of goes through just crazy workouts. He's shooting, pretty much just swishing threes for a half an hour straight. He's the last guy on the court pretty much every single day. If I'm a Halliburton or I'm an Edwards or I'm one of those guys, I'm looking over and seeing what Steph Curry's doing in his mid-30s, and I'm starting to think, hey, maybe on some of these long plane rides or these train rides, in France when they have to go up and play the opening round, I might be asking Steph for some secrets. I might be tapping him on the shoulder and seeing if I can get any wisdom from that guy because it's clear that he walks the walk as well as talking the talk.
Ben Golliver is our guest from the Washington Post. He joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Ben, in that same line of questioning, do you think the motive for LeBron James ending his 12-year absence of Olympic basketball and being a part of one last run here? I did, the casual sports fan digging and was like, oh, well, I guess he'd have one more gold than MJ, but that surely isn't the thing motivating him for doing this. Maybe, I don't know. Where do you envision the reasoning behind him wanting one last run when he's talked about managing his body and trying to limit mileage on those tires? Where's the motivation there?
Well, I wouldn't discount the comparisons with MJ by any stretch, right? I mean, we know that matters to him. He's made that clear when it comes to the rings conversation and trying to be the GOAT. So all those kinds of things factor. I think, logistically, it would have been a long summer without basketball if he didn't play, right? And I think it's possible when he was starting to plan, last fall about did he want to compete or not, he could probably look at that Lakers roster and be honest and say, well, we're probably not going to make a deep postseason run, right? Like, they were decent on paper, but they weren't great. And, the clock's ticking for him, too. I mean, clearly this is going to be his last big opportunity. Paris is an incredible market, for marketing opportunities, for visibility. I think the ratings are going to be amazing for this year's Olympics, especially compared to Tokyo, where there were so many time zones and it was COVID, so there was no fans. I mean, this is the most hype I've seen around the USA basketball program since at least 2012. I mean, they got 200 or 300 people camped out at the Bellagio just trying to get a look or a selfie or an autograph from these players, screaming at the top of their lungs every time Steph Curry walks by or Kevin Durant walks by. They kind of feel like the Beatles. You know what I mean? And I was here for the World Cup team last summer. Those guys were walking through the hallways of the casino. Nobody even knew who they were, right? So it's a little bit different. And I think LeBron, obviously, he likes the attention. He likes being on center stage. I think he likes being the face of this program as well and being a steward of USA basketball. And so I think it's also a fun opportunity for him to get to team up with Steph and KD all together for the first time. And he mentioned this, as did Steph. They've known each other since Steph was at Davidson, but they have never spent real amount of time together at any point besides like All-Star Weekend. And even then they said it's just kind of like a pocket of time here, a pocket of time there. So they're going to really get to further their friendship in a way that they really never have up to this point. And I think those kinds of things factor in as well. When you talk about, like the 2008 Redeem team or that 2012 team, those guys speak so fondly of that experience because they bonded so tightly and really formed some strong friendships. That's why when Kobe passed, part of the reason why everybody was so upset is because they got a really good chance to know him during those two Olympic runs. And I think that they're hoping to recapture that type of environment, that type of vibe with this year's group.
I think Ben is being modest because when he leaves the hotel, they just scream his name as well. They're like, oh, my gosh, that's Ben Golliver. But I do want to ask, heading into tonight's scrimmage against Team Canada, I know to some people who might be more casual basketball fans, they're like, oh, it's Canada, the U.S. will smash them. But I remember last summer when Team Canada came out and blasted them, I believe, in the third place game, and Dylan Brooks went off, and he's a confident fella as well. So what is the mindset or the energy around this game, even though it's an exhibition game, but to sort of set the tone for this Olympic run?
Well, their optimism, their excitement, their hype has been really high these last couple of days. I mean, Bam Adebayo said it. He's like, have you seen this roster? He's like, look at this roster. It's ridiculous. Anthony Edwards had the best line of anybody. He said, hey, look, I don't think KD, LeBron, and Steph can lose just by the three themselves. So if you throw in two of us mortals, we're probably going to be all right. So I think there's a lot of, excitement. And, I think that there's the assumption, as always, that they're going to be able to get it done and bring home gold. But Canada is a really interesting foil of a team, right? They've got 10 NBA players on their roster, including Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jamal Murray. So they got star-type talent, proven playoff-type talent, a champion in Jamal Murray, and they're going to be shooting a lot of threes. And that's the thing about this international game. You could have all the star power you want. If somebody gets red hot against you, it could be really hard to slow them down, especially with that short three-point line. So that could be the equalizer in this matchup. I think for what USA is going to want to do, they're going to try to establish themselves inside for sure. I think they're going to try to get a feel for what their bigger lineups look like. And then they're going to obviously want to show a real commitment on the defensive end. That's always been a point of pride and a point of focus for this program, dating back to Mike Krzyzewski. And they just and they didn't have it in last year's FIBA World Cup. That was the problem. Like, they couldn't get stops when they needed to. Their defense folded in some key moments, and they really couldn't rebound the basketball very well. I expect those things to change this time around. Canada is going to be outmatched on that front line, and so it's really going to boil down to them. It's going to be about being scrappy, forcing turnovers, and hitting threes. That's going to be the Canadian blueprint for this game.
Ben, how surprising, if at all, was Kawhi Leonard's withdrawal, and was Derek White the obvious choice to replace him?
Look, I mean, this might be a little controversial. Kawhi never should have been invited in the first place. I think that this was a very predictable thing to have happen given his injury issues. He's never been a part of the USA basketball program before. Obviously, you salute him for wanting to be a part of it and going through the training camp and all those kinds of things. But was that really in the best interest of USA basketball to have to make this change at a late date, as opposed to bringing somebody who was going to have a higher probability of being able to compete and contribute? To me, it was a mistake from the start, and they should have looked at a guy like Jaylen Brown, who wound up being the Finals MVP, who kind of has a similar body type. Maybe not the same resume as Kawhi Leonard, but he's younger, he's more athletic. I think he would have fit into a really good role as part of a second unit. He would have been able to give up the ball a little bit and commit himself defensively. that would have been the guy I would have targeted from the start. I would have just said, hey, sorry, Kawhi, we know what you want to be a part of this, but now's not the right moment. And instead, now they have to go with Derek White. And, he's going to be helpful. Obviously, he plays great defense. Him and Drew Holiday showed what they could do defensively during the finals. He's going to be able to space the court and shoot three-pointers. That's huge on the international stage as well. But now this roster's looking a little bit thin on the wing. They got Kevin Durant. They got Tatum. The ball's going to be in LeBron's hands. In the international game, you probably would have wanted to have another wing in that spot. And I would have rather had Jaylen Brown than Derek White. And I would have rather had Jaylen Brown than Kawhi Leonard. So nobody's perfect. I mean, obviously, this is still an embarrassment of riches. I think they've got 11 All-Stars on this group now. Derek White's the only non-All-Star. Steve Kerr was saying that all these guys potentially, before the Derek White move, had Hall of Fame potential, right? So you have a ton of talent, but you want it to be balanced. And I just think it was a mistake the way they played this Kawhi thing.
He is Ben Golliver of the Washington Post out in Las Vegas covering Team USA. Ben, thank you again for making the time for us, and I hope that it is as enticing of a Team USA campaign as we expect it to be.
Well, I hope so, too. You guys had the best show in town, though, with the Fever trying to have that comeback today, man. So, I don't know. I'm a little jealous of you guys.
Hey, I'm glad we have mutual envy then in that case because, while you're right, that was thrilling. Hey, there's nothing like a little time in Las Vegas.
All we had to do was just get Caitlin Clark to replace Kawhi, and everybody here would have been happy.
That's all we needed to do.
Thanks, Ben.
I could not agree with you more. That should have been the move. Caitlin Clark for Cooper Flag. Those are the moves.
Exactly. Thank you, Ben. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
That is Ben Golliver again. You can find his work with the Washington Post. He joined us via the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. We're going to take one final break. We come back, we'll have plays of the day. Perhaps there might be one or two from Eddie. We shall see. But either way, we will conclude with our list of players with the most to prove going into Colts camp here in just a couple of weeks. It's Query and Company on the Fan. Today's plays of the day, we are getting down to the final days of international soccer campaigns. We'll start first stateside as Copa America is ongoing. Well, if you listened to me yesterday, you wouldn't have ended up like Drake and, wasted money on Canada taking a L yesterday to Argentina, as Lionel Messi does find the back of the net in that match. So they are now into the final of Copa America. We'll take Colombia to win over Uruguay, to advance, I beg your pardon, over Uruguay today in Copa America. One game in the Euros, it's the other semifinal. Spain broke hearts yesterday. They await the winner of England and the Netherlands on Sunday. England and Netherlands taking place right at 3 o'clock today. I'll take England to qualify and move on to a second straight Euro final. In baseball, we'll take the Baltimore Orioles.
Hey, root for me.
Cute fella to win on the money line over the Chicago Cubs.
How was that impersonation, by the way?
That was pretty good. I think Jake's a little bit deeper, but he would be proud. He would be proud to give you a tip of the cap there.
We got the other James who's producing JMV next walking in.
James
what is he listening to right now?
We'll take the Baltimore Orioles to win the money line over the Chicago Cubs. We'll take the Tampa Bay Rays to win the money line over the New York Yankees. Last one for you, give me the Boston Red Sox to win the money line over the Oakland Athletics. Eddie, any plays for you?
Are the Yankees going to get back together?
No, I don't think so. I think it's done. No, I don't know. This is just a rough patch. They're still on path to make the playoffs. They've lost 16 of their last 20 games. Any day now would be nice to get the ship back at sea or the train back on the tracks. Eddie, any plays for you?
Nothing. I don't like anything today, really.
All right, no plays of the day for Eddie. This will have to be some type of express train, speaking of which, was finishing our list. I believe we were at number 3 on Colts players the most to prove. For me, that's Jelani Woods. I know he's still underneath contract for one more season after this, but if he's not the answer, unless there is another answer like Kylan Granson or somebody on that roster, you're going to have to find a true tight end for Anthony Richardson and a Shane Steichen offense next offseason. He'd be number 3 for me in that area.
That's a solid pick, I think, for sure, because he has to show something. I know he showed some flashes his rookie year, but to miss an entire year with hamstring injuries, to come back, he still is, on paper, their most dynamic tight end. So if he can get it rolling, that could be huge for this offense and for the future of the team.
I would agree with Eddie on having him a part of the list. 4 for me would be Kwity Paye. And then 5, and this is weird because he's a rookie, maybe expectations are low in that regard because he's a rookie. Leatu Latu is 5th for me because I think there should be chip on the shoulder of he starts earlier than people expect. He makes an impact sooner than people expect. If you guys want to go 3, 4, and 5, again, still rapid fire here of where you're at for most
real
approved.
Quick, I'll probably go, not something to prove is health with Braden Smith. Yep. He's got to be healthy. He's got to show me something this upcoming season, obviously. I think that a dark horse for me is Evan Hull. He was a promising running back coming out of Northwestern, played one game last year. Could he be the backup or like that third down running back for this team? And as a 5th pick, I'll go Jalen Jones. I know we've talked a lot about the secondary, but he is a dog, and I think that he has to prove it and sustain it over an extended period of time to prove that he can be that third outside starting cornerback alongside Juju Brents and obviously Kenny Moore in the slot.
See, I go the other way. I go with Juju Brents over Jalen Jones because Jalen Jones was able to stay on the field.
Fair.
Juju Brents could not stay on the field last year, so I think there's a lot more to prove there. You're a second-round pick. You're a hometown guy. There's a lot of expectations that come with a second-round pick, let alone you're from the Circle City. So I had Juju Brents as number 4. I think number 3 for me was Nick Cross. Number 2 was who was it?
We didn't go full of 1 and 2, but your 5th, your last one.
It kind of goes up in the air, really, because there's a multitude of players you could go with this one. I go with Braden Smith.
So those are Eddie's, mine, and James' top 5. Special thanks to James Boyd for being here with us. You can follow his work at Romeoville Kid with The Athletic. James, always good to catch up, my man. Looking forward to hopefully getting to get together again very soon. Thank you as well to Shreyas Laddha of the Kansas City Star, Chris Kamrani of The Athletic, and Ben Golliver of the Washington Post. All those will be up on the podcast center, and just search Query & Company wherever you get your podcast. The Ride with JMV is next. Keep it right here, of course. Tomorrow, Query & Company will be back in action with Jake Query, fresh in from Chicago. Thanks for joining us here on The Fan.